Chapter 3702. Roar! Roar! As soon as Jiao Kong finished speaking, two roars that carried terrifying auras suddenly resounded from the space ahead. They were clearly two ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm, and they'd been hiding in the depths of the core area of the Root of Evil. Earlier, they'd paid no attention to the horrifying battle that had been going on for an entire day. But at this moment, these two ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm had finally made an appearance with the arrival of this army of 10 million warships. Moreover, it was two of them. This was no different from a signal, and it had two meanings. Firstly, it wasn't that this region didn't have existences that had surpassed the Star-Lord realm, and it was even to the extent that there might be some that had surpassed the Region Lord realm. Secondly, it was hinting that these existences at the Region Lord realm and above wouldn't participate in the low-level battles at the borders. They had their own mission, and it was to protect the spatial passageway that led to the depths of the core area. So they wouldn't stand by idly if they were to invade this region. Jiao Kong and Du Jiting's expressions instantly changed when they realized this, and their hearts sank. They were the only two Region Lords in the entire army of the Second Universe, yet two ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm had appeared as soon as they arrived at the depths of the core area of the Root of Evil. Moreover, their high-end combat strength wasn't inferior to their side at all. This caused Jiao Kong and Du Jiting to feel like they'd lost their advantage. They'd lost their sense of superiority and depression. You've overstepped your boundaries. Retreat immediately and leave the core area. Otherwise, we'll attack. Along with these two roars, a black and a green ray of light flashed through the expanse of space that was filled with the corpses of primordial beings, and then two colossi instantly appeared. Both of them were around 3 kilometers tall. Obviously, this wasn't the limit of their bloodline true bodies because both of them emanated the aura of Region Lords. Moreover, both of them were at the advanced stage of the Region Lord realm, and they were slightly stronger than Jiao Kong and Du Jiting. Both of them were merely at the 6th rank of the Region Lord realm, and they were at the peak of the intermediate stage of the Region Lord realm. They still needed to break through before they could be considered to have stepped into the late stage of the Region Lord realm. One of the two figures was a green-haired tortoise with long green hairs all over its body, which fluttered without wind. The other was a porcupine beast with a pitch-black body and glossy fur. With a single glance, one could tell that it was an existence with coarse skin and coarse flesh that was very difficult to deal with. Moreover, this porcupine beast had 2 long and narrow blood-colored fangs. It was certain to be extremely tough. With a casual flick of its fangs, even a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters would be pierced through. When they appeared, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise were in the void thousands of miles away. However, as soon as they appeared, they did not stay where they were. They immediately crossed the void and slowly approached. There was a large number of native ferocious beasts below the Region Lord realm behind them, and there were around 10 million of them. This included the humanoid talkative beasts that had fled into the space ahead and the lucky survivor, the black armored mother. Both of them had recovered from their injuries. However, there were clearly not that many indigenous ferocious beasts that had fled into the void ahead. Clearly, there were other indigenous ferocious beasts' lairs in this area. Not only had the native army recovered from their injuries, their numbers had been replenished as well. Now, they were slowly approaching under the lead of the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise, and the final battle was about to erupt. This time, even Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, who were Region Lords, felt extremely pressured. During the battle before this, the balance of the battle had been tilting towards the joint forces of the various races of the Second Universe since the beginning. Yet now, the situation seemed to have turned around. The high-end forces of the enemy were actually two terrifying existences at the advanced stage of the Region Lord realm, and even Jiao Kong and Du Jiting weren't confident in their ability to defeat them. So, the balance of the battle had tilted towards the native ferocious beasts. But even then, Jiao Kong and Du Jiting's eyes still flickered with a dark glow of excitement. Because they noticed that there were clearly some ferocious beasts at the Grotto realm amongst the army of 10 million. It was utterly impossible for such cultivations to survive in this terrifying expanse of space that was filled with the pressure of countless primordial living beings. However, they hadn't exploded into pieces. This proved that these ferocious beasts really did possess some sort of secret technique that could resist the terrifying pressure that was being emanated from the corpses of countless primordial living beings in this expanse of space. So long as they were able to grasp this secret technique, then the army behind them would be able to enter safely. Moreover, even if they lost this battle, and in the end, the entire army of 10 million was forced to retreat,
Even if they had to withdraw from this core hinterland and retreat to the buffer zone of the central region outside, as long as the two of them could obtain this secret technique, then when the reinforcements of the second universe arrived,
Jiao and Du Jiting could still be considered to have contributed greatly. In the future, once they had taken over the star field, the source of all evil, and fully grasped the void refining formation deep within its core, they might still be able to receive a drop or two of evil origin elixir when they were rewarded for their contributions. Realizing this, Jiao and Du Jiting's eyes immediately turned red. Their gazes were fixed on the slowly approaching army of ferocious beasts, especially the two primordial porcupines and the primordial tortoise at the front of the army. Their cold and ferocious voices immediately rang out. It's not impossible for us to retreat temporarily, as long as you hand over the secret technique that can resist the pressure of the primordial living beings in the expanse of space. That's right, as long as we obtain the secret technique, the army can retreat. At that time, we will only send a small number of powerful experts in. If you have the ability, then just stop them. Screech! Do you think we are easy to bully?
Before the two of them could finish speaking, the primordial porcupines and primordial tortoises in the expanse of space in front of them were enraged. They raised their heads and roared at the same time, especially the primordial porcupines, which let out a roar. He felt humiliated that the other party actually said such words. Did they think he was easy to fool because he had a pig brain? This was too much. Amidst the roars, the two long and narrow blood-colored fangs in the primordial porcupine's mouth, which had already reached its feet, suddenly lit up at this moment, emitting an intense blood-colored light that made people unable to look directly at it as it suddenly flicked forward.
Whoosh! Rumble! Boom! Chapter 3703. Black Boar, do you want to die? How dare you sneak attack us? Attack! All the experts above the Genesis realm, attack immediately. Caught off guard, the primordial porcupine took action first and tore a space crack in the middle of the army, directly destroying thousands of battleships, fortresses, and fortresses. This scene infuriated Jiao and Du Jiting, who immediately roared. Furthermore, he immediately gave the order to start the battle. Hum! Hum! Dense buzzing sounds came from the battleships and fortresses behind them. This was the rhythm of the battleships and fortresses charging at full power. The cannons on the battleships were about to be activated and fired. At the same time, a large number of experts of various races flew out from the battleships. Jiao had already given the order. In the entire army, except for the higher-ups who were in charge of commanding the fleet, everyone above the 13th Great Realm, the Genesis Realm, had to rush into the void to participate in the battle. In the entire army, there were dozens of Star Lords, hundreds of Universe Realm experts, tens of thousands of Cosmic Realm experts, and more than 1 million Genesis Realm experts. All of them surged out, activating their bloodlines and manifesting their bloodline true forms. They instantly transformed into enormous beasts and spread out in front of the army of 10 million battleships, roaring and roaring as they charged forward. At the same time, two figures rushed out from the flagship fortresses of the Blood Wyrm clan and the Colorful Python clan. They were the two old monsters of the fleet, Jiao and Du Jiting. Whoosh! Screech! Jiao and Du Jiting immediately activated the bloodline in their bodies and showed their bloodline true bodies as soon as they appeared. A blood-colored one-horned Wyrm appeared in the void and charged at the primordial porcupine. As for Du Jiting, his bloodline true body was also tens of thousands of feet long. He was a 7-colored python, and his tongue was thousands of feet long. His speed was extremely fast, and he rushed out like a blood-red bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, he had swept up 2 cosmic light realm savage beasts in the void in front of him and swallowed them into his mouth, chewing them in front of everyone. So ferocious. Then, before anyone could react, this 7-colored python's eyes suddenly blazed. 2 beams of demonic light shot out of its eyes and turned into a ray of light that whistled out. After shooting out, its speed was extremely fast. There was even a strange sizzling sound in the void, as if boiling oil had been poured into ice and was melting quickly. It was the bloodline ability of the Colorful Python clan, Furious Python Rainbow. All those years ago, a genius from a top-rate clan in the technological faction of the human race had unintentionally flashed in front of the 2 beams of 7-colored light shot out from Medusa's Furious Python Rainbow. He was struck by these dazzling and resplendent beams of energy, and it caused his figure to suddenly stop moving. In an instant, he started to petrify at a visible speed, and he completely transformed into a gray stone statue. He didn't possess even a trace of vitality,
and he fell to the ground below the battlefield before collapsing and perishing. Yet now, such a terrifying bloodline ability had been shot out from the eyes of a formidable multicolored python at the Region Lord realm, and its might was terrifying to the extreme. Moreover, its speed was utterly unbelievable. The two multicolored and resplendent beams of light instantly shot into the army of native ferocious beasts behind the primeval turtle. Screech! Roar! Furious roars and shrill howls resounded in an instant, but it was extremely short, and it only lasted half a roar before it stopped. The two enormous beams of blazing multicolored light pushed forward, and all the native ferocious beasts that were struck along the way trembled violently before losing their vitality. They transformed into petrified gray stones that fell down from the sky. It was just a bloodline magical power, but it had killed at least thousands of indigenous beasts. Among them, the most powerful one was actually a universe master. The power of this attack was not weaker than the previous sneak attack of the primordial porcupine. Finally, they had won back some face. It made countless strong people of various races in the second universe in the millions of battleship army behind them feel refreshed. At the same time, Jiao Kong, who'd transformed into a ferocious blood WYRM, smashed his fist forward as well. After that, a blood WYRM of similar size roared as it shot out, and it instantly arrived before the primeval porcupine before swallowing it. Screech! The primeval porcupine raised its head and roared angrily. Its two long and narrow blood-colored claws suddenly shook, and a huge blood-colored shield appeared in front of the primeval porcupine. Its body instantly disappeared, and when it reappeared, it had already passed behind the blood WYRM that Jiao Kong had blasted out with the blood WYRM demon punch. Its huge body, which was thousands of feet long, had quietly completed the void teleportation. Caught off guard, it approached the blood WYRM's abdomen. Its eyes flashed fiercely, and its fangs directly pierced toward the blood WYRM's abdomen. Rip! The familiar sound of cloth tearing could be heard, and then a scarlet rain of blood fell from the sky. The blood WYRM's body was too huge, and Jiao Kong didn't expect this primeval porcupine to have mastered some of the universe's void law. Such a close-distance void teleportation could be done without making a sound. Even he couldn't catch the slightest fluctuation. Caught off guard, the blood WYRM got close to him. In the blink of an eye, a bloody wound that was 300 meters long appeared under its abdomen. It had suffered a great loss, and a rain of blood fell from the sky. While the monstrous battle was unfolding, in another void, the moment it rushed up, it suddenly launched a sneak attack. It ignored the primeval turtle and attacked the large number of native beasts behind it. It had successfully killed thousands of powerful native beasts, and at this moment, it had clearly angered the primeval turtle. Screech! An incomparably shrill and short howl rang out, and the green fur all over the primordial hairy tortoise's body instantly expanded. In just half a breath of time, the vast void space of 10,000 miles had already turned into a strange sea of green fur. At this moment, the original body of the primordial tortoise had disappeared, and its aura couldn't be sensed anymore. On the contrary, the huge body of the huge seven-colored serpent was shrouded in this weird sea of green hair. Roar! Swish! Shrill howls instantly resounded. The entire vast and powerful sea of green fur rose and fell incessantly, and it shook this expanse of space. Moreover, the shrill howls of the rainbow python frequently resounded from amidst the strange green fur that surged like waves. Obviously, it wasn't a match for the primeval turtle's strange bloodline ability, and it was trapped within the sea of green fur and was injured at the first possible moment. In the blink of an eye, the four region lords on both sides had fallen into a heated battle. However, the situation was clearly disadvantageous to the allied forces of the second universe. No matter if it was the blood WYRM, Jiao Kong, or the rainbow python, Du Zhiding, both of them weren't a match for their opponent as soon as they entered into battle, and they were injured in succession. Chapter 3704. Bang! Swish! Rumble! As soon as the battle began, the two supreme experts at the Region Lord realm who resided within the army of the second universe had been injured by the primeval porcupine and the primeval tortoise respectively. The former's blood WYRM had a huge hole opened up in its stomach by the blood-red fangs of the primeval porcupine, and a rain of blood sprayed down from it. Moreover, the latter's entire body was enveloped by the ocean of green fur formed by the primeval tortoise's body, and it was firmly restrained within this strange ocean that caused one's scalp to go numb. It was unable to struggle free, and only numerous unwilling howls and shrill howls could be heard from within the surging waves of green fur. All of this shocked the countless experts within the army of the second universe. The higher-ups of the various clans who were in charge of commanding the fleet were filled with terror and uneasiness, and they immediately gave the order to attack with all their might at the first possible moment after all the battleships were fully charged. The sound of air being torn apart and explosions resounded throughout the heavens and the earth. Numerous beams of energy of various sizes shot out from within the army of battleships, and they interweaved into an enormous net that enveloped the battlefield. Only around 40% of the dense energy beams of the battleship cannons blasted towards the army of native ferocious beasts in the distance. On the other hand, around 60% of the remaining energy beams were split into two. One blasted towards the left of the battlefield, and its target was the primeval porcupine. The other wave blasted towards the right of the center of the battlefield, towards the sea of green hair that covered a distance of 5,000 kilometers and completely drowned the figure of the 100,000-foot-long Du Jiting, firmly restraining him. The commanders of the various clans had clearly noticed that the two region lords who resided within the army weren't a match for the primeval porcupine and the primeval tortoise at all.
Jiao Kong and Du Jiting were the souls and mental pillars of the entire fleet.
If they were to perish or suffer heavy injuries, then the entire army would be utterly defeated, and it would be utterly impossible for them to gain a foothold in this region that was the source of all evil.
They would be like stray dogs that had been swiftly forced to flee. Go!
It was for this reason that more than half of the countless beams of light fired by the tens of thousands of warships were split into two groups and blasted towards the sea of green hair transformed from the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise respectively. On one hand, they wanted to help the blood WYRM heavily injure the primeval porcupine, and on the other hand, they wanted to tear apart the ocean of green fur that covered 5,000 kilometers in order to rescue Du Jiting. It was truly a good plan, but it was indeed the only thing that the higher-ups of the various clans in the second universe could do. Their cultivations were utterly unable to participate in such a battle between region lords. The only thing they could do was utilize the might of the battleship cannons of the battleship army and launch a dense barrage of attacks. Unfortunately, they'd overestimated the might of these cannons in the end. Or perhaps, they'd underestimated the ability of region lords. The first to launch an attack was the primeval porcupine who just made a huge hole in the blood WM's stomach. Obviously, it had been hurt by the energy beams from the battleships. Even though the energy beams that covered the heavens and the earth were converged together, then even its 3 kilometers body would be completely enveloped by the energy beams of the battleship cannons, even though it hadn't been able to tear apart its skin. Red spots had been left on its body, and it caused the porcupine to suddenly howl violently. After that, its figure suddenly vanished on the spot, and it flashed to the center of the army of the second universe behind the central territory. Hong long long. With a loud rumble, the primordial porcupine suddenly moved to the center of the battleship army. Its body, which was originally only about 1,000 meters tall, rapidly expanded at this moment. In just half a breath, it was already 10,000 meters tall, and the two blood-colored fangs in its mouth also reached 10,000 meters in length. It wasn't much smaller than a small fort with a diameter of 50 kilometers. In the next instant, true calamity descended. Ow! A crazy roar came from the mouth of the 10,000-foot-long porcupine. Immediately after, its 10,000-foot-long body rampaged through the army of millions of people in the second universe. A monstrous aura of madness raged through the entire expanse of space. The most terrifying thing about the porcupine was that it went berserk. Once it went berserk, then even world lords couldn't help but fear it. Such existences were truly too tough, and they were extremely difficult to kill. However, it just so happened that their vital blood energy was terrifying to the extreme. Those two fangs were simply nightmares. According to legend, during the primeval times, there was once a 30 kilometers tall primeval porcupine that was at the world lord realm. It rampaged madly through the starry sky of the universe, and even the stars in space were directly slashed apart by its extremely sharp and terrifying fangs. Or they were smashed apart, and no one could stop it at all. And now, the various warships, fortresses of the second universe's 10 million-strong army were like the stars that had been ravaged by the Sector Lord primordial porcupine in the primordial age when it had gone mad. Wherever the 10,000 feet tall porcupine passed, there was no suspense, even if it was 100,000 meters in diameter. It was torn apart at the first instance. The primeval porcupine's 30 kilometers tall body charged left and right, rampaging through the army of millions. Its terrifying pair of bloody fangs were like a pair of harvesters, and all the battleships that blocked its path were all turned into paper paste, shattering into pieces, exploding into huge fireballs and falling into the void below. This scene happened too suddenly. Before the 100,000 feet blood flood dragon, whose abdomen had been torn open by the ancient porcupine before it went crazy, could recover from its shock. Countless terrifying explosions came from the battlefield behind it. In just a short span of 2 to 3 breaths, at least 1,000,000 battleships were destroyed. The more severe ones were directly disintegrated, completely turning into fireballs, and were thus annihilated. Those that were slightly more lightly injured temporarily lost the ability to continue fighting. The battleships were damaged, and they no longer had the time to launch attacks. They hurriedly tried to repair themselves. Retreat! Immediately retreat! Retreat from the core hinterland, retreat to the buffer zone outside, immediately. Seeing this scene, Jiao Kong, who had transformed into a 30 kilometers tall blood flood dragon, opened his eyes wide. The primeval porcupine's cultivation was originally stronger than his, reaching the late stage of the Domain Lord realm. Even if it hadn't gone crazy, he wasn't its match. Caught off guard, his abdomen was immediately cut open. A 300 long gap. And now, the primeval porcupine had clearly gone berserk. Its body, which was originally only a few thousand feet, had directly expanded to 100,000 feet. Coupled with its pair of incomparably sharp bloody fangs, and its rough black skin that even the ship's cannons couldn't penetrate, this was simply fatal. It was definitely a genuine starry sky roller. The current Jiao Kong didn't even dare to approach. Although the army of millions was huge, it couldn't withstand the torment of this crazy primeval porcupine. If it plowed back and forth 7 or 8 more times, the entire army of millions would probably be completely destroyed.
Chapter 3705. Boom! Rumble! Roar!
In the void, endless rumbling sounds of explosions rose and fell, reverberating endlessly. From time to time, there would be a sky-shattering roar. The primordial porcupine was enraged. Of the countless large and small ship cannons that were bombarding it, except for the black antimatter energy beams that it had felt threatened by, which it had avoided, the rest of the normal ship cannons had all hit its body. Even though it wasn't able to tear apart the primordial porcupine's black hide, which was said to be more durable than the abyss tortoise's shell, it still left red spots of varying sizes on its body. Some of them were even slightly swollen. To be able to make the thick black skin of the immemorial porcupine show red spots and slight swelling, it was obvious how painful it was. This made it go berserk, and it had completely gone berserk. The immemorial porcupine was known for its resistance to beatings and daring to go berserk. Once it went berserk, even sector lords would have to retreat, not daring to face it head-on. At this moment, it was rampaging in this army of 10 million battleships. It was no different from a crazy black boar charging into a field of cabbages. The difference. Fortunately, when Jiao Kong saw that the situation was not right, he made a prompt decision and ordered the entire fleet to retreat. In an instant, the scattered beams of light from the battleships completely disappeared. None of the battleships dared to stay in this terrifying void any longer. They all turned on their energy shields and ran at full speed, heading straight for the boundary line that led to the central region buffer zone of the root of all evil. The entire army of 10 million finally started to retreat after destroying 1,000,000 battleships. At the same time, in the void in front of the battlefield, all the experts above the Genesis realm who were fighting with the army of 10 million native beasts were retreating as well. They didn't have the heart to fight anymore and just wanted to leave this crazy star field as quickly as possible. At the same time, after the Blood Dragon gave the order for the entire fleet to evacuate, it did not dare to rush to the rear and touch the head of the wild boar. Instead, it directly charged at the sea of green fur on the right side of the battlefield. Even if they were completely defeated, they had to rescue the region lord of the colored python clan, Du Zhiting. Otherwise, the entire allied forces would collapse completely. The death of a region lord was sufficient to cause the fleets of the various clans to fall into a state of panic.
Screech! Screech!
At this moment, the sea of green hair that was thousands of kilometers away was still surging with green waves, and from time to time, extremely shrill and terrifying screams could be heard. Du Yachting, who had activated his bloodline true body and transformed into a colorful python, was clearly not in a good state. One could vaguely hear the terrible howls and screams coming from the rolling waves of green hair.
A kind of shock and fear could be vaguely heard.
Since it was able to make a supreme elder at the region lord realm let out shrill cries of terror and panic, this obviously showed how terrifying everything he was suffering right now was. Even the 10,000 feet long blood flood dragon, which was gritting its teeth and charging toward the rolling sea of green hair, felt like it was going into battle.
Its back was already cold.
Earlier, when the allied forces of the Second Universe launched their first volley of attacks, Around 30% of the energy beams from their cannons had blasted towards the sea of green hair that was thousands of kilometers away. Not to mention the energy beams from ordinary star obliterator cannons that were unable to pose a threat to region lords at all. Merely the energy beams from the antimatter deathlight cannons that were blasted out from the smaller forts with a diameter of 50,000 meters and the larger forts with a diameter of 100,000 meters were absolutely capable of dealing damage to this sea of green hair.
The sea of green hair formed from the primeval turtle's body had caused material damage. This wasn't related to the primeval turtle's strength at all, and it was entirely a problem of its energy attribute. The antimatter deathlight cannons could melt all matter and energy of the positive attribute. Even though the sea of green hair formed from the primeval turtle's body was strange, it was a positive attribute substance in the end. Earlier, when a few thousand antimatter deathlight cannons had blasted over in unison, the sea of green hair was too vast.
It covered an entire 5,000 kilometers of space, so it was utterly impossible for it to dodge like the primeval porcupine had done. The direct result of this was that the sea of green hair that was 5,000 kilometers away was instantly riddled with holes, and a few thousand holes that were around 20,000 kilometers wide had appeared within the sea of green hair.
If it was any other living being, then such an attack would have probably perished on the spot.
But to the primeval turtle, even though these few thousand holes that appeared within the sea of green hair had caused it to suffer a certain degree of injury, it couldn't be considered to be a minor injury.
Even if it couldn't be considered to be a heavy injury, it wasn't far off. There were too many of them. But in reality, those terrifying holes had practically vanished in an instant. After all, it was a vast sea formed from countless strange green hairs. Those strange green hairs flowed like seawater, and they instantly filled up all the holes.
Even if the primeval turtle's body had suffered injuries because of this, it was slowly recovering through some sort of special ability within the sea of green hair. If there was a ray of light that could pierce through the ceaselessly surging green hair and see the situation within the sea of green hair, then that person would notice to their astonishment that, at the center of the sea of green hair was a 30 kilometers long rainbow python that had been blasted into two, and it was struggling incessantly with exhaustion.
It was the bloodline true body that the region lord of the Rainbow Python clan, Du Jiting, had revealed.
At this moment, its bloodline true body had been blasted into two, and around a third of its tail had been separated from its body. However, this wasn't caused by the primeval turtle, and it was the result of the numerous black pillars of antimatter energy that had left behind over 1,000 enormous holes in the sea of green hair.
At that time, the rainbow python was within the sea of green hair, and its figure couldn't be seen at all.
The commanders of the various fleets in the second universe had been dazed for a moment, and they'd forgotten that they might accidentally injure the rainbow python. So, they'd actually directly ordered around 30% of the energy pillars to be blasted towards the sea of green hair that was 5,000 kilometers away. Though several black antimatter energy beams that were 30,000 meters in diameter had pierced through the sea of green fur, leaving huge holes that were right next to each other, the entire body of the 10,000 feet long rainbow python that happened to be in those spots was hence split into two.
Chapter 3706. Screech.
Screech. In the sea of green fur 5,000 kilometers away, Du Jiting's miserable howls grew even more shrill and miserable. Not only did they reveal dense terror, it was even to the extent that a weak aura was swiftly becoming denser.
Unfortunately, no matter how he struggled, he couldn't break free from the main body that had been blasted apart.
Tiny green hairs that were as dense as hair pierced into his flesh, immobilizing him. At the same time, these tiny green hairs that had pierced into the flesh and blood of his true body not only had the effect of binding his body, but also had an even more terrifying power.
They were like tiny straws that were sucking the flesh and blood of his colored python true body. Previously, the sea of green hair that the primordial turtle had transformed into had been bombarded by countless energy beams from the ship's cannons, especially the thousands of black antimatter energy beams. Their power was too terrifying. Even a domain lord like the primordial turtle couldn't withstand them. Thousands of holes had been blasted into the sea of green hair thousands of kilometers away, causing the primordial turtle to suffer heavy injuries. However, these injuries were quickly healed. Although they hadn't completely healed, they were at least half healed.
The energy used to heal the injuries came from the countless tiny green hairs that pierced into the flesh and blood of the colored python true body of Du Jiting.
This was completely treating the colored python true body as a source of flesh and blood, and was about to suck it dry.
It was precisely because of this that a dignified old monster like Du Jiting, in a situation where he couldn't break free no matter what, would reveal such a strong sense of fear even in his miserable howls.
Even a domain lord couldn't resist the horror of being sucked dry alive. It was too cruel, and it made his hair stand on end. Roar! Old Du, you're still holding on at a time like this. Have you lost your mind? This sea of green hair is too strange and too flexible. Even I can't break it open. If you want to break free, you have to break free from the inside. Don't hesitate. Sever your own bloodline true body and escape with your life. Otherwise, when that berserk primordial porcupine regains its senses and rushes here, this old man can also retreat. At that time, you won't be able to escape even if you grow wings. Roar! Jiao Kong's tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon flew a circle around the sea of green hair. In the end, he was sure that he couldn't come up with a solution to break out of this sea of green hair in a short time. He could only grit his teeth and let out a furious roar, reminding Du Jiting, who was trapped in the sea of green hair, to destroy his bloodline true body and escape. These roars immediately alarmed the primordial porcupine that was wreaking havoc in the rear of the battlefield. At this time, the tens of millions of battleships of the allied forces of all races in the second universe had already left. In the void behind the battlefield, except for some damaged battleships that had been blown into huge fireballs, there were not many battleships left. A large area of empty space appeared. Disturbed by the roar of the tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon, the primordial porcupine, which was still in a berserk state, immediately turned its head and looked over. Its huge eyes flashed with crazy bloody light. Without hesitation, it raised its head and roared, then immediately spread its 4 huge legs and rushed toward the sea of green hair. During this time, the pair of huge bloody fangs of the primordial porcupine fiercely flicked at the tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon hovering above the sea of green hair from a million miles away. Whoosh! Space split apart as an enormous spatial rift suddenly appeared in the space below the blood flood dragon. A strand of terrifying suction force swept over, and it almost caused the blood flood dragon to stagger and fall into the spatial rift. If that really happened, then with Jiao Kong's cultivation as a region lord, even if he didn't perish, he would still be able to struggle free and charge out of the spatial rift in the end. But at the very least, he would lose a layer of skin even if he survived. The primordial porcupine was too difficult to deal with. Not only was its skin thick, its blood-red fangs were a nightmare to deal with. Coupled with the fact that it possessed the laws of space, it wasn't just capable of silently teleporting through space. Even a region lord wouldn't be able to catch a trace of its aura. Moreover, it even possessed such a long-range method of attacking with the laws of space. It was simply impossible to guard against. At the very least, Jiao Kong was terrified of it, and he didn't dare to rashly face it. When he saw the primordial porcupine charging towards him with a pair of bloodshot eyes, it was clear that it was still in a berserk state. His face immediately turned green with rage. Roar! Old fellow, that thick-skinned fellow is running madly over here. I don't want to go against him. If you hesitate any longer, then they'll surround you together. Forget it, I'll be leaving first. Take your time to think about it. The blood flood dragon roared furiously once more, and he really didn't dare stay here any longer. His figure flashed as he charged towards the boundary that led to the central region. At the same time, Du Jiting, who was trapped within the ocean of green fur, seemed to have finally made up his mind at this moment. Roar! A sorrowful cry that was filled with unwillingness and monstrous rage resounded from within the ocean of green fur. After that, a ray of 7-colored light suddenly appeared amidst the ceaselessly surging waves of green fur. It flashed for a moment before it struggled free of the waves of green fur and charged into the sky above the waves. After that, it turned around and chased after the blood flood dragon that had just turned around and left. It was only at this moment that the ray of 7-colored light revealed its true form, and it was actually a small colored python that was covered in injuries. Originally, as a region lord, Du Jiting's body could reach a height of 30 kilometers after he activated his bloodline and revealed his bloodline true essence. Yet now, Du Jiting had no choice but to sever his bloodline true essence in order to struggle free of the restraints of that damnable ocean of green fur. At this moment, only his main body had escaped from the ocean of green fur. Even though he was still in the form of a 7-colored python, his body had shrunk greatly and was only around 300 m long. The worst part was that he was covered in injuries. Only a large portion of his body remained, and a small portion of his tail had been completely destroyed. It would take a very long period of time to recover. As for his cultivation, it had even fallen from the 6th rank of the Region Lord realm to the 7th rank of the Star Lord realm. It was a drop of almost an entire realm. Even if he spared no expense to recover at full speed after escaping the core region,
he would only be able to recover to the first rank of the Region Lord realm in a short period of time at most. If he wanted to possess the formidable combat strength of a mid-stage Region Lord once more, then he would probably have to wait until this expedition was over and he returned to the ancestral land of his race in the second universe.
Roar!
With grief in its heart, the 1,000-foot-long seven-colored giant python raised its head and roared angrily. Without any hesitation, it followed closely behind the 10,000-foot-long blood dragon. Like a tiny dot, it finally passed through the boundary of the core hinterland of the origin of all evil and escaped to the buffer zone of the central region outside.
Chapter 3707. Screech! An extremely shrill howl resounded abruptly.
After that, the Region Lord Du Jiting of the Colored Python clan, who'd severed his bloodline true body and seemed extremely weak because he'd lost a portion of his tail, had passed through the core of the root of all evil. The boundary between the buffer zone and the central region had arrived at the central region. As far as the eye could see, the entire buffer zone was in chaos. The space was filled with the remains of black beetles that had been blasted apart. They were densely spread out, and there was even a large amount of grayish-green liquid floating in midair. The air was filled with a nauseating stench. Compared to the countless remains of black beetles, there were even more battleships, fortresses of the various races of the second universe that were in such chaos that even their formations couldn't be discerned. The allied forces of the various races of the second universe had won a great victory in this battle, and they'd cleared the periphery of the core of the root of all evil. A large amount of enormous corpses were floating in midair in that area. There were the corpses of the numerous native ferocious beasts in the core of the root of all evil, and there were also the bloodline true bodies of the various races of the second universe that had activated their bloodlines. But right after that, the entire fleet seized the opportunity to pursue the enemy and charge into the depths of the core of the root of all evil. Everything was reversed, and a nightmare had descended. Needless to say, the combat strength of the two native ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm was truly shocking. They were already at the 7th rank of the Region Lord realm, which was the late stage of the Region Lord realm. However, it just so happened that their race was so obscure, and their bloodline talents were simply impossible to deal with. Zhao Kong and Du Jiting, who were both Region Lords of the second universe who were slightly weaker than them in terms of cultivation, were completely suppressed. They were extremely furious. He was being completely suppressed. The primordial porcupine's combat strength was unparalleled, and its pair of peerlessly sharp blood-red fangs were simply a nightmare. It just so happened that its thick black skin was extremely tough, and even the energy beams of the superstar obliteration cannon from the 10,000-meter-tall fortress were only able to leave behind red spots on its skin. Not only was he unable to break through this layer of pigskin, he had instead stimulated its vicious nature, causing it to go completely berserk, turning into a 10,000-zhong-long berserk porcupine. In such a state, even ordinary initial sector lords would have to retreat. This meant that the old monster Zhao Kong wouldn't dare to face it head-on. The other immemorial turtle wasn't as powerful as Jihao, but its bloodline talent, the Sea of Green Hair, was indeed creepy. Once it was used, the primordial hairy tortoise's entire body turned into a sea of green hairs that covered thousands of miles of the void. Once it trapped the enemy, countless hairs would pierce into the enemy's flesh and blood, binding them tightly. At the same time, the primordial hairy tortoise's entire body was constantly sucking through the green hairs. Obtain the power of blood, flesh, and chi and blood. However, such a boundless sea of countless tiny green hairs had a headache-inducing flexibility. No matter how they attacked, it was useless. A few waves would immediately dissolve it. Even if they used the black antimatter death ray cannons to attack, although they could cause damage, the holes they created could be filled up immediately. That feeling was like punching into the sea. Wherever the fist energy passed, it would create a passageway, but before the fist energy could reach the sea, it would create a passageway. When the fist was pulled out, the passageway would be filled up by the surrounding seawater. The primordial hairy tortoise's state was simply like an unkillable cockroach. Unless countless antimatter energy beams were used at once to completely wipe out the entire sea of green hairs, otherwise, as you attacked, it would pierce countless tiny green hairs into the enemy's body, sucking in the flesh and blood to repair itself. There was simply no solution. It could be said that the reason why the allied forces of the second universe had been defeated in this battle was entirely because of the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise. Not only were these two extremely rare ancient beings powerful to the point of making one's hair stand on end, their respective bloodline talents were also extremely unpopular, causing Zhao Kong and Du Jiting to be caught off guard. As soon as they came into contact with each other, they had already lost, and it was impossible to reverse the situation. That was why the entire army had been defeated in an instant. Otherwise, if Zhao Kong could resist the attacks of the primordial porcupine, and Du Jiting could resist the attacks of the primordial hairy tortoise, the huge army of native ferocious beasts led by the humanoid multi-mouthed monster, the black-armored Mother Empress, and the other native ferocious beasts might not have been able to resist the forces of the Second Universe. Tens of millions of battleships of the Allied forces were bombarding them. However, it was too late to say all of that now. A great defeat was a great defeat. Although the Allied forces of the Second Universe, which had more than 10 million battleships of all kinds, had left behind more than 9 million battleships of all kinds that had fled to the Central Region's buffer zone. Moreover, the two region lords, who were the top combatants of the entire fleet, had at least managed to escape alive even if they were injured. After some recovery, they could still maintain the strength of a region lord. This was especially so for Zhao Kong, who was a region lord of the Blood Wyrm clan. His injuries were almost negligible, and his combat strength wasn't affected much. However, a great defeat was a great defeat in the end. Moreover, this great defeat had descended in just half a day after the original complete victory. The impact on the morale of the entire Allied forces of the Second Universe was immeasurable. Now, as far as the eye could see, the nearly 10 million battleships of all kinds in the Central Region's buffer zone were in chaos. Even their battle formations were in chaos. All the battleships were giving off a gloomy and dejected aura. It was a complete mess. Under such circumstances, the Blood Wyrm clan's old monster, Zhao Kong, who was still in peak condition, immediately dispelled his bloodline true body state and disappeared from the void. He took human form and rushed into the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan's fleet. No matter what, he had to reorganize the entire Allied forces at the first possible moment and try his best to recover their morale as soon as possible. As for Du Jiting, who'd charged out from the dividing line right behind him, Zhao Kong couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to him. In any case, he'd noticed the situation of his pursuers when he'd charged out from the dividing line. The army of native ferocious beasts hadn't pursued him at all. It was even to the extent that they hadn't pursued him beyond the depths of the core region, and this included the primeval porcupine and tortoise that were in a berserk state. Under such circumstances, even though Du Jiting's cultivation had fallen by an entire realm and could be said to be extremely weak right now, it wouldn't be long before he charged back to the Colored Python clan's flagship fortress. Once he recovered at full strength, it wouldn't be long before he regained his strength as a region lord. There was no need for Zhao Kong to worry about him at all. Chapter 3708. At that moment, Du Jiting, the elder of the Colored Python clan, had not only fallen from the realm of a region lord to the Star Lord realm, but his original body was also covered in wounds. Coupled with the grief and indignation in his heart, he was caught off guard. By the time he realized what was happening, it was already too late. After all, the withered demon Bloodblade was a Starry Sky Supreme treasure and not a quasi-Starry Sky Supreme treasure. Not only was the slash extremely powerful, but as long as Yi Xian was willing, he could even conceal his killing intent within the blade. The target would only notice it when the blade touched their skin. Moreover, Yi Xian's cultivation had far surpassed his original level in his true form of the demonic ape. He had reached the 14th realm, the cosmic light realm. As such, the final outcome was more or less decided. With just one slash, the head of the huge rainbow python was chopped off, and it died an unnatural death. In the next moment, Yi Xian appeared and waved his hand, taking Du Jiting's headless body into his undying world. If the old man was in his human form, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to take his body because he would have a psychological barrier. It wouldn't be good to roast and eat it. However, it didn't matter if he was in his original form of the rainbow python. He wasn't afraid even if the rainbow python's body was highly toxic. The dual-colored flames of the Shengnong cauldron would expel all the toxins. Of course, the reason why the old man's head and body were still intact after being beheaded by the withered demon Bloodblade was because Yi Xian had deliberately controlled the withered demon Bloodblade so that it wouldn't absorb the essence of the old man's blood. On one hand, Yi Xian couldn't bear to let the withered demon Bloodblade absorb such precious flesh. On the other hand, he was worried that the withered demon blade spirit inside the blade would fully recover if he did. If that happened, it would really trigger the so-called heavenly aura detection and cause the heavenly tribulation to descend. To Yi Xian, even if he had a way to avoid being detected by the heavenly aura detection, this was still an opportunity to secretly scheme against someone. How could he just let it go to waste? When he waved his hand and put away the remains of the python, his true form of the devil ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was exposed.
His concealment state was removed, and his figure appeared in the void. However, this didn't matter anymore. In front of them was the dividing line between the central region's buffer zone and the core region. Yi Xian could pass through it with a single leap. Although he did not know what had happened inside, he could see that the second universe's army was in such a bad state. They must have encountered a powerful native beast and been forced to leave. However, Yi Xian was not afraid. He was now in his three-headed, six-armed devil ape true form. It had to be noted that the remains of two primordial ape demons had been found in the void deep inside the central hinterland. One of them was only a Star Lord, while the other was so strong that it was beyond the Sector Lord level. Judging from the remains of the two primordial ape demons, Yi Xian would definitely not be considered an intruder by the native beasts inside as soon as he appeared. Instead, they would probably consider him as one of their own. Of course, to ensure this effect, Yi Xian had taken other precautions, such as the colorful python's head that was twisted in the right hand of his true form of the devil ape. Even if the native beasts in the core hinterland had doubts about his origins, after all, although there were two corpses in the void within the remains of the ancient demon ape, Yi Xian, the one who was alive, had clearly appeared out of nowhere. Even if that was the case, the colorful python's head in his hand was enough to prove that he was a friend and not an enemy, which would resolve the native beast's doubts in the central hinterland. Using the head of a zone lord as a sign of allegiance was definitely enough, both in terms of weight and sincerity. In fact, Yi Xian had already planned everything. He had been thinking that it would be great if he could kill a Star Lord expert or a heavily wounded Star Lord expert in the Second Universe's coalition army with a sneak attack. Then, he would definitely be able to convince the natives in the central hinterland of the root of all evil if he presented his head to them. The ferocious beasts immediately accepted. He didn't expect that he would run into a heavily wounded Star Lord colorful python when he raised his head while he was still thinking about the idea. He immediately made a decision and killed the python. He was still holding the python's head in his hand, but Yi Xian didn't know that he had actually killed the python. It was a Zone Lord expert whose level had dropped. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to attack. A man's reputation was like a tree's shadow, and a Zone Lord expert was famous for his ferocity. Even if he was heavily injured and his level had dropped, Yi Xian had to consider it carefully. And now, with the head in his hand, not only was his hidden body exposed, but his series of actions were also clearly seen by the powerhouses of the various races of the Second Universe and the chaotic battleships in the void behind him. The experts of the fleets of the Second Universe, who had fled to the buffer zone of the central region, had been paying close attention to the direction of the path behind them since they arrived. After all, Zhao Kong and Du Jiting were the pillars and souls of the entire fleet. If they didn't escape, the entire fleet wouldn't have a backbone. It was precisely because of this that when Zhao Kong and Du Jiting rushed out of the dividing line one after another and entered their sights, all the experts in the nearly 10 million battleships heaved a sigh of relief at the first moment. Then, Zhao Kong, the Zone Lord of the Blood Wyrm clan, deactivated his bloodline true form and returned to his human form. He flashed and entered the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan. Du Jiting, the Zone Lord of the Colored Python clan, was obviously heavily injured. His level had dropped, and he was only a Star Lord at the moment. However, it didn't matter. Zone Lords had extraordinary means. After he returned to the flagship fortress of the Colored Python clan, he would heal his wounds. Even if he couldn't immediately return to his peak strength, he would still be able to reach the early stage of the Zone Lord realm. Feeling uneasy, the commander of the Colored Python clan's fleet even immediately gave an order for the flagship fortress of the fleet to come forward and welcome the Zone Lord. However, at this moment, a black demonic blade silently extended from the void and cut off Du Jiting's head with one slash. Then, a three-headed, six-armed ancient ape demons, which was obviously a ferocious native beast, but was extremely small, only about 30 meters tall. It should be a little demon ape cub. It waved its hand and put away the headless body of the colored python. Then, it carried the head of the colored python, turned around, and rushed to the boundary line ahead. Chapter 3709. A Region Lord Old Monster? An elder of the Colored Python clan? Yi Xian was so scared that his body trembled and his legs almost went limp. Only now did he remember that the colored python that he beheaded seemed to have followed closely behind the Blood Flood Dragon clan's 10,000-foot-long Blood Flood Dragon and rushed out from the core area in front of them. If nothing unexpected happened, it was very possible that it was an elder of the Colored Python clan. It was just that it was heavily injured and its cultivation had dropped by a large realm. He had really hit the jackpot. He had actually killed an elder of the Colored Python clan in a moment of carelessness. No one would dare to believe this. Boom. Whoosh.
Whoosh. Just as he was in a state of shock, the densely packed and chaotic battleships behind him had already begun to bombard him.
Beams of energy from the battleship's cannons shot towards Yixian like a tidal wave, as if they didn't cost anything.
One of the 2 area lords of the fleet had been assassinated.
This matter was too serious, and there was no need for anyone to give the order.
The powerhouses of the various fleets of the Second Universe almost subconsciously launched a volley of attacks at him.
Roar! Little monkey, you deserve to die. An earth-shattering roar resounded as a figure rushed out from the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan. It was the elder of the Blood Wyrm clan who had just returned, the Region Lord Old Monster Jiao Kong. At this moment, Jiao Kong was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He had only relaxed after confirming that there were no pursuers behind him. He had deactivated his bloodline true body and rushed into the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan's fleet. This was also because he had seen the nearly 10 million allied fleets that had fled into the buffer zone in such a chaotic state. He was worried that the army would fall into chaos, so he was in a hurry to reorganize and calm them down. Who would have thought that those damned native ferocious beasts would actually set up an ambush here in advance without any pursuers? Moreover, the ambush was only a little cosmic realm devil ape? Even though the bloodline of this little devil ape was extraordinary, and its true form of a devil ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was extremely shocking, it still hadn't fully matured. It was merely at the cosmic realm, yet it had been able to kill a region lord from the allied army by underhanded means. If this matter were to spread, it would be a great humiliation. More importantly, Jiao Kong had no way of explaining this matter to the Colored Python clan. Their region lord Old Monster had been heavily injured, so he should have been responsible for protecting them. Moreover, the entire army originally had 2 region lords. As long as they reorganized and found a way to deal with the 2 primordial porcupines and primordial tortoises, they might have been able to fight. But now everything was over, and he was the only domain lord left, so there was no way he could defeat the other party. He could only hole up in this buffer zone and guard the stable passageway that he had painstakingly opened up, waiting for reinforcements to arrive. In other words, Jiao Kong was basically useless in this battle. When he returned to the Second Universe, he would be questioned by the Colored Python clan. It was simply not worth it. Thinking of this, Jiao Kong even had the heart to die. With a furious roar, he immediately activated his bloodline true body. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying blood dragon that was tens of thousands of meters long soared through the sky and chased after Yixian. Seeing this scene, Yixian was so scared that his soul almost left his body. This was an old monster from the Domain Lord realm. With his current strength, although he had already reached the 14th Great Realm, the Cosmic Light Realm, if he were to fight with the supreme power of the universe, he would really dare to fight head-on. However, if he were to face a Star-Lord Old Monster, even if he could hold on for a while, he would definitely have to flee while fighting. As for the old monsters of the Domain Lords, they would definitely die. There was no chance of survival. Fortunately, the dividing line to enter the core hinterland was only a few dozen kilometers away. Yixian only needed a flash to cross the dividing line and arrive at the core hinterland. After he entered the core hinterland, the scene before his eyes was a complete mess. Countless corpses floated in midair. There were the corpses of the experts of the various clans of the Second Universe and the native ferocious beasts of the core hinterland. Moreover, most of them belonged to the latter. However, in Yixian's opinion, so long as it was a bloodline true body, then he could store it within the farmer god cauldron and slowly enjoy it in the future. Unfortunately, he didn't have the mood to do that at all. There was a region lord Old Monster pursuing him from behind. As for the reinforcements he was looking forward to, it was the formidable native ferocious beast that had crushed the allied forces of the Second Universe to the point they fled in a sorry state. Obviously, it was impossible for it to be at the edge of the core hinterland. It should be at the depths of the core hinterland, which was filled with the corpses of primordial beings. If the blood flood dragon caught up to him before he arrived there, then it would truly be a tragedy for him. When he thought up to here, Yixian didn't hesitate any longer. His figure flashed as he immediately teleported through space. Moreover, he teleported incessantly. His devil ape true body flickered incessantly in space, and every single flicker would cross a distance of 500,000 kilometers. After a few such teleportations, a terrifying pressure assaulted him from the direction of the dividing line a few million kilometers behind him. The blood flood dragon had really caught up to him, and it was rumbling over. Yi Xian was terrified to the point his scalp constricted, and he didn't dare turn around. His right hand held the 30 m long 7-colored python head as he continued teleporting towards the depths of the core hinterland. After a few more teleportations, Yi Xian raised his head and saw 2 native ferocious beasts appear in space ahead of him. One was a completely pitch-black porcupine that was around 300 m long, and the other was actually a turtle that was around 3 m long. Its entire body was covered in green fur, and it was furry like a green ball of fur. When Yi Xian saw them, the porcupine and turtle noticed Yi Xian as well. Their expressions were clearly stunned, and they stared fixedly at him as if they'd seen a ghost. Yi Xian teleported once more, and his figure flashed before the black porcupine that was around 300 m long. He stomped his right foot forcefully on the porcupine and immediately cursed. "What are you standing there for? Quickly take me to see your king. Didn't you see that I cut off the head of a region lord? Do you believe that I'll kill you if you continue to stand there?" Before he finished speaking, the green-furred turtle that was around 3 m long had already landed on the head of Yi Xian's body. It stretched out its furry green claws and patted him twice. Then, it directly climbed up his neck to the golden skull of the other skeleton, and patted it a few times as it did before. It even muttered, "Really? It's really the devil ape real? But, isn't this cultivation too weak? Where did it come from?" When he heard that this little turtle actually thought that his cultivation was too weak, Yi Xian was immediately displeased. What made him even more displeased was the turtle's actions and the color of its dense fur. Chapter 37:10. Yi Xian was truly anxious. There was a region lord blood serpent chasing after him, but it just so happened that he didn't run into any powerful local ferocious beasts, even though he was deep in the core of the source of all evil. Instead, he ran into a black porcupine that was over 300 meters long and a green hairy tortoise. In his anxiety, not only did he stomp on the porcupine, he even pulled the tortoise in front of him and threatened to kill the two of them. The scene was so shocking that the blood serpent that was chasing after him was dumbfounded. It suddenly stopped thousands of kilometers away and didn't dare to move forward. A guy who could stomp on the porcupine and pull the primordial tortoise in front of him like a pet wasn't someone he could afford to offend. If nothing unexpected happened, then this little devil ape probably had a backer. That old man's cultivation was absolutely not merely at the region lord realm, and it was at least at the world lord realm. The blood serpent immediately lost confidence when he thought of that. At this point, he had basically figured out the nature of the local ferocious beasts in the source of all evil. These guys obviously knew that the void formation in the depths of the core hinterland was a great fortune. Therefore, the closer they were to the core, the more powerful the local ferocious beasts would be. Furthermore, as long as you didn't disturb them or jump into their territory to make a scene, they could do whatever they wanted in the periphery. They would basically ignore them. For example, the army of the second universe had cleared the periphery of the core and killed countless local ferocious beasts, but there was no movement deep in the core. Nobody paid attention to them. It wasn't until the last 10 million soldiers charged into the depths of the core hinterland that the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise appeared. They led the remnants of the army that had escaped and charged over. Then, the army of 10 million fled in disorder. One of the two region lords had severed his bloodline true body and dropped to the Star Lord state. It should have been the best opportunity to hunt them down. However, the porcupine and the tortoise didn't have that intention at all. From this, it could be seen that as long as they did not provoke them, staying in the buffer zone outside of the central region would not cause any trouble. It was precisely because of this that Jiao Kong had chased after them in a fit of rage. In his opinion, it was only a little devil ape cub that was only at the cosmic light realm. He could just turn around and leave after capturing it. It wouldn't attract any trouble at all. But now, it seemed that things weren't like that. This little devil ape's origins aren't small, and the backing behind it is at least at the World Lord realm. Otherwise, why would it act so casually towards region lords like the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle? It was no wonder that it dared to hide in the buffer zone of the central region and cut off the head of an old monster with a single slash. As expected, he was extremely daring. He was used to running amok in this star field, the source of all evil. Now that Jiao Kong had chased him away, what if he was pissed off and complained to the emperor? At that time, the ancient ape demons, who might be hiding somewhere in the core of the central region and was too lazy to care about the outside world, would definitely be in trouble. Even if that realm lord wasn't alarmed, the little devil would only scold the porcupine and the tortoise and ask them to chase after him. Then, It would be difficult to settle this matter peacefully. More importantly, through this little devil ape cub that dared to stomp on an immemorial boar and hold an immemorial tortoise in front of him, Zhao Kong could basically confirm that there was a Sector Lord-level immemorial ape hibernating in the depths of the core region ahead of them. In this way, even if Du Jiting didn't die, he would never dare to go to the central region again. The only thing he could do was to retreat immediately to the outer region of the source of all evil. At the same time, he sent out a fleet of scouts to report the information back to the bases of the races in the second universe as soon as possible. He asked the old fellows of his race to urgently discuss countermeasures. In short, he would absolutely not dare to go any further before the reinforcements arrived. He would at most guard the stable passageway that traversed the outer region of the source of all evil. As for the region lord of the colored python race, Du Jiting, he had perished in any case. Moreover, it was because of his own carelessness. Could it be that he had no choice but to be buried with him? Not to mention that they weren't from the same race. Even if they were from the same race and were related by blood, it would absolutely not be to such an extent. When he thought up to this point, Zhao Kong immediately removed his bloodline true body, and the blood WYRM that lay across space vanished to reveal his human form. Moreover, there was even a smile on his face. However, his smile was truly quite terrifying, and it was simply uglier than crying. He cupped his fists and shouted at Yi Xian and the other two region lords from afar. Fellow Taoist porcupine, fellow Taoist tortoise, please don't misunderstand. I have no ill intentions. It's just that it's too dangerous for this young fellow cultivator to be alone outside. I've escorted him all the way here. Since there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Please don't send me off. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Zhao Kong's figure flashed, and he fled without looking back. In the blink of an eye, he had already passed through the dividing line, disappearing from the core of the source of all evil, and escaping to the buffer zone of the central region. At the same time, a huge army of native beasts finally appeared in the depths of the central region. They were clearly led by a few top-level beasts who were emitting the aura of Star Lords. They included the humanoid talkative monster that Yi Xian had seen last time, the queen of the black beetles that had just advanced, and some Star Lords that he had never seen before. Behind those Star Lords was a group of native beasts that were as strong as Universe Lords. Behind them were the Cosmic State, the Genesis State. What caused Yi Xian to be a little dazed was that when the entire enormous army of savage beasts reached the void tens of thousands of kilometers away, they all stopped. All of their eyes were filled with reverence as their gazes converged in this direction. These gazes were basically focused on the black porcupine beneath his feet and the green tortoise that he was still holding in his hand. However, a portion of them would occasionally sweep their gazes over Yi Xian's body with deep curiosity and doubt. Well, Yi Xian suddenly felt that his blood was freezing. Even though he was slow, he realized what was going on at that moment. Regardless of whether it was the words and reaction of that region lord from the Blood WYRM clan or the expressions and reactions of the countless native ferocious beasts in the enormous army of native ferocious beasts before them, all of them undoubtedly proved a problem. That was the black porcupine and green tortoise that he was currently stepping on and gripping in his hand. They were not as weak as he thought they were at all. If nothing unexpected happened, there would be at least two old monsters in the Domain Lord realm. The two of them were the ones who had forced the Second Universe's allied forces to flee in a sorry state. Chapter 37:11. Little brat, where are you from? That's right. There are only two corpses of ancient ape demons in the root of all evil, and neither of them are females. Don't try to fool me. You don't belong here. Before Yi Xian could say anything, the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise that he was holding in his hand had questioned him. Even though they weren't reprimanding him, there was still a wisp of fierceness in their tone. This was because Yi Xian was indeed a pure-blooded ancient ape demon, and he was holding the head of a region lord from the invader's side in his other hand. Of course, another reason was that the bloodline inheritance of the ancient demon ape was extremely extraordinary. Even in this star field, the source of all evil, it was ranked at the top. As a matter of fact, the Star Lord primordial ape demon in the core of the root of all evil was a close friend of the two primordial porcupines and the primordial tortoise. However, it had failed to become a region lord and had died ever since. So both the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise felt a sense of closeness towards Yi Xian, who had suddenly appeared in the form of a three-headed and six-armed ancient ape demon. Otherwise, why would they allow him to step on the primordial porcupine's back, hold the region lord primordial tortoise in his hand, and threaten them? In short, when they saw this little devil ape,
The primeval porcupine and tortoise recalled their old friend that had fallen while charging into the ranks of region lords all those years ago, and they instinctively took him to be in existence like a junior or a nephew of the younger generation. Even then, since he was an outsider from outside the root of all evil, they had to find out his background in the end. It would be bad if there was a problem. That was why the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise had asked that question. Actually, they had faintly made a decision in their hearts. If there was no problem with this little ape's origins, then what harm was there in allowing it to stay? I'm from the outer realms, and I was born in a desolate canyon on a star. I followed the guidance of the bloodline in my body to come here. Yi Xian slowly understood the situation. In order to become familiar with this group of indigenous ferocious beasts, he had no choice but to pretend to be a charlatan. A holy look appeared on his face as he said that he was following the guidance of the bloodline. Then he added, "This star field gives me a sense of familiarity. I can feel the aura of my blood relatives in the depths ahead." As he spoke, he pointed towards the core of the root of all evil ahead. In any case, it was an indisputable fact that there were the remains of 2 ancient demon apes there. One of them was even tens of thousands of feet long, and it had been dead for an unknown number of years. Who knew if it had left behind any bloodline outside? No one dared to jump to conclusions on this matter. And when Yi Xian said that he had sensed the aura of a blood relative, it just happened to fit the facts. Basically, he could get away with it. Who would have thought that the reason Yi Xian was able to say such words was because he'd been here in his human form before, and it was even deeper than that. What if he had entered the netherworld cauldron? At that time, there was the intimidating aura of the headless infant corpse, and it just so happened that the Black Bug Queen was looking for a mate. Almost all of the native beasts in this core hinterland hid and didn't dare to show their faces. They didn't want to be targeted by the Black Bug Queen, who was like a crazy woman in heat and suffer a great calamity. Therefore, even though Yi Xian had been there before, none of the indigenous ferocious beasts in the core of the root of all evil had seen him. At this moment, the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise were more or less reassured after hearing his words. The last trace of doubt in their eyes was gone. Since he had said that the aura of a blood relative was up ahead, it was basically certain that the little ape was indeed related to the 2 ancient demon apes that had been reduced to corpses. Even if it wasn't an old friend of theirs, it could only be a descendant of the ancient demon ape that was a Star Lord, or a bloodline left behind by another ancient demon ape that was even stronger. Even though that ancient demon ape had perished countless years ago, it had been a corpse since the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise had gained consciousness, and it had lost all signs of life a long time ago. However, even though it was a corpse, they had been living together for so many years, and they'd long since regarded each other as neighbors and companions. Since it was a bloodline descendant of the ancient demon ape that he'd left behind who had followed the guidance of the bloodline in his body to this place, then there was naturally no reason to drive him away. With that thought in mind, the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise immediately released a friendly aura and consoled Yi Xian. "Welcome home, little brat. Don't be afraid, those fellows outside won't dare to come in rashly. At most, they'll be hiding in the buffer zone outside. There's no need to pay any attention to them." Even these 2 region lords who were the strongest amongst them had acknowledged Yi Xian's identity as one of their own, so the entire army of native ferocious beasts that resided in space in the distance naturally didn't dare to object. The last trace of vigilance in the eyes of all the indigenous ferocious beasts had dispersed, and they'd completely accepted Yi Xian. They'd taken this little devil ape with 3 heads and 6 arms to be their companion. At this point, Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief in his heart, and he was completely at ease. However, even though this group of indigenous ferocious beasts had accepted him, Yi Xian still had to pass through the depths of the core area every single year to obtain fortune from the nether furnace. What if the headless corpse of an infant didn't respond to him? Then he would be utterly unable to pass through that terrifying area that was filled with the pressure of countless primordial beings. So, Yi Xian had to form a good relationship with this group of indigenous ferocious beasts and obtain their trust so that he could find out about their secret technique to avoid the terrifying pressure of the primordial beings. When he thought in this way, he immediately raised his right hand that held the multicolored python's head, and he said in a slightly flattering tone, "Great kings, I presume you're hungry after that fierce battle just now, right? I just happened to cut off a snake's head on the way here, and it should be quite delicious after I roast it. Take it as a meeting gift." As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Xian immediately drew out a strand of the Shunnong dual-colored flames from the farmer god cauldron within his body, and he roasted this region lord's head on the spot. Originally, under the circumstances that he hadn't utilized the farmer god cauldron, Yi Xian was unable to directly draw the Shenong dual-colored flames from within his body out of his body. However, since the purplish warbler, Duanmu Xiaocha, and Zhao Qianru frequently utilized the Shenong dual-colored flames, it had advanced into dual-colored flames. The flame's agility had clearly improved as well. Presently, Yi Xian was already able to draw it out of his body with ease. Yet now, as he drew out a strand of the Shenong dual-colored flames from within his body with a wave of his hand, he roasted that region lord's head on the spot. The primeval porcupine and primeval tortoise were clearly stunned. Chapter 37:12. Where's the fire? Where's the fire just now? Little featherhead, hurry up and get it out. Stinking brat, are you deliberately tantalizing this old man's appetite? I just smelled a little fragrance and extinguished the fire before it was cooked. As the wisp of Shenong's dual-colored flame was extinguished, the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise became anxious on the spot. The latter jumped onto Yi Xian's head again and dug around between his three heads, as if Yi Xian would hide the dual-colored flame that he had just drawn out between the three heads. It was as if it was sandwiched between the cracks. This was not the end. The primordial porcupine, which was 100 feet tall, also stretched its huge head over and wanted to rummage through Yi Xian's body. The huge breath made Yi Xian stagger and almost fall to the ground. Only now did he realize that he had misunderstood. Just now, when he suddenly saw the eyes of the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise burst out with a burning green light, Yi Xian thought that the moment he mentioned that he was hungry, these two fellows would be interested in him and want to eat him in one bite. After all this time, it turned out that they had seen the extraordinariness of the Shenong dual-colored flame. They knew that not only was the food roasted by this kind of fire incomparably delicious, but it was also very beneficial to the body. It was simply like the effect of boiling great medicine. That was why their eyes were emitting a green light, and now they were acting so impatient. Realizing this, Yi Xian's eyes instantly lit up. It seemed that this group of native beasts were all a group of foodies. Since they were foodies, then what was the problem? Among all the native beasts, only he had the Shenong dual-colored flame in his hands. What did this mean? It meant that from now on, he would be able to control the stomachs of these fellows. For a foodie, what could make him submit better than controlling his stomach? With this thought, Yi Xian immediately became spirited. He made up his mind. Not only would he grill a feast of Shenong unusual flame for these two native ferocious beast kings, he would also grill the millions of native ferocious beasts behind them. As long as they could provide him with ingredients, he would draw out a wisp of dual-colored unusual flame and grill them for them. In any case, the dual-colored flame in the Shenong cauldron was inexhaustible. The exotic flame had its roots in the depths of the volcanoes in the central region of the cauldron. As long as the Shenong cauldron was not destroyed, the Shenong exotic flame that had been ignited by Yi Xian's core fire would never run out. In addition, after the purplish warbler, Duanmu Xiaocha, and Zhao Qianru messed around and inadvertently turned the original orange-red flame into the current dual-colored flame, Yi Xian also understood one thing. That was, if he wanted to upgrade the Shenong heavenly flame, he had to use it frequently. So, helping these native ferocious beasts to grill a feast was absolutely a good thing for Yi Xian. Since it was like that, then why not? Grandpa Pig, Grandpa Turtle, your gazes from before terrified me. Isn't it just grilling meat? I'll be right back. Also, Master Tortoise, can you not climb on top of my head in the future with your original color? Yi Xian calmly changed the way he addressed it, and their relationship became slightly closer. As he spoke, he waved his hand and immediately drew out another strand of dual-colored flames from within the Shenong cauldron, and he continued grilling it. As he grilled it, he continued. However, this region Lord Realm Python head isn't really enough. It's only 30 m long, and it's probably only enough to fill the gap between my teeth. Before Yi Xian could finish speaking, the primeval turtle had turned around and vanished with a swish. A few breaths of time later, 2 pieces of the 7-colored python's remains were dragged over by it. The primeval turtle was still around 3 m long, but a few strands of its green hair had extended out and wrapped around the 2 pieces of the python's remains, and it was dragging them over at extreme speed. It was absolutely a perfect portrayal of an ant dragging an elephant, and it stunned Yi Xian. Even more shocking to him was that the 2 pieces of the python's corpse that he was dragging over clearly emanated the terrifying aura of a region lord. The head was over 2 kilometers long while the tail was over 3 kilometers long. It was clearly a multicolored python that was at the region lord realm, yet it had been blasted into pieces by Chen Shi.
It had been torn apart. Yi Xian was stunned for a moment before he came to a sudden realization. No wonder that Region Lord Realm Lord of the Rainbow Python clan had fallen to the Star Lord realm in the end. Moreover, his 30 kilometers long body had shrunk to only 300 m long, and Yi Xian had beheaded him with a single strike of his blade. After all this time, his bloodline true body had already severed itself and remained in the depths of this core region. What had escaped was just the pure colored python true body. Since that was the case, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise would definitely have enough food. Even if the roasted python meat melted in their mouths, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise wouldn't be able to finish it in one meal. Presumably, the human-shaped talkative monster and the new Star Lords like the black-armored Mother Empress in the void far away would be able to get a share of the pie too. It's a little too extravagant to eat these two big chunks in one meal. I'll leave the 3,000 zhong long chunk for the next meal, Yi Xian pondered in his heart. If he could roast the bloodline true body of a region lord in front of the Second Universe's allied army, it would definitely be a rather awesome thing. He naturally wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. So, he casually found an excuse as he spoke, and with a wave of his hand, he placed the 3,000 zhong long chunk of the python tail into the space within the farmer god cauldron within him. Of course, he directly tossed it into the storage cave at the bottom of the volcano in the central region. Otherwise, it would definitely benefit the purplish warbler, Duanmu Xiaocha, and Zhao Qianru. The might of the farmer god dual-colored flames far surpassed the single-colored orange flames. Not only was the roasted meat even more fragrant and delicious, the miraculous medicinal effects of the roasted meat were even stronger. Even the speed at which it was roasted was extraordinarily swift. While Yi Xian was speaking, the 30 m long head of the python before him had been completely roasted. It was originally 30 m long, but now it had shrunk to around 20 m long, and all the impurities had been removed. At this moment, the entire head was golden and flowed with oil while a strange fragrance drifted through the surroundings. After all, it was the head of a region lord's main body, and it had even just been severed. So, the vital blood essence contained within its flesh and blood was too dense. It wasn't just the primeval porcupine and tortoise that were staring blankly and drooling, it was even to the extent that the myriad of native ferocious beasts in space in the distance had clearly smelled this strange fragrance that assaulted their nostrils, and all of them were staring blankly at the golden python head before Yi Xian. Saliva flowed from their mouths. Needless to say, this scene was extremely magnificent. A myriad of ferocious beasts of various races and sizes were staring at a golden python head that had been roasted, and they were silently drooling in unison. It was obvious how magnificent it was. However, perhaps it was because they considered that this python head was roasted by Yi Xian, but when they noticed that he didn't make a move or make a sound, not to mention those native ferocious beasts in space in the distance, even the nearby primeval porcupine and tortoise didn't hold back at all no matter how much drool flowed from their mouths. After all, they'd taken Yi Xian to be one of their own, so they had to be polite. Chapter 37:13. The primeval porcupine and tortoise didn't pay any attention to the change in the way they addressed Yi Xian. At this moment, all their attention was drawn over by the golden python head that was merely around 20 m long. After all, it was roasted from the head of a region lord realm multicolored python. Even though the primeval porcupine and tortoise were region lords as well, even they hadn't tasted the flesh of existences at the same level as them, especially when it was roasted well and was even roasted with Shunnong's dual-colored flames. Even though this golden python head was only around 20 m long, it was roasted from the head of a region lord realm multicolored python in the end, and the flesh and blood essence contained within it was extremely dense. Even if it was to the primeval porcupine and tortoise at the same realm of cultivation, it was extremely beneficial to them. Even though they hadn't tasted it yet, they were region lords after all, and they discerned it a long time ago. Actually, the primeval porcupine and tortoise were fine with such a feast, and even the human-form multi-mouthed monsters and the new black-armored mother and the other stellar lord realm experts who were far away in space could eat to their heart's content as well. However, the native ferocious beasts at the universe realm couldn't eat too much, otherwise, it would be too nourishing. It would probably only harm them and not benefit them. As for Yi Xian, it was even more impossible for him to eat as he pleased like he did when roasting such precious flesh and blood. Yes, he'd even roasted the flesh and blood of that golden crow at the World Lord realm. But that was completely different. That golden crow was at the World Lord realm indeed, but it had perished countless years ago in the end. Even though a portion of its vital energy and blood essence still remained within its flesh and blood, and it was even to the extent that its blood hadn't dried up,
Too much of its flesh and blood essence had been lost imperceptibly, and it had spread throughout the universe outside the corpse. On the other hand, even though this multicolored python was only at the Region Lord realm, it had just perished. It was even to the extent that it hadn't perished when Yixian severed its head with a single strike of his saber, so its flesh and blood essence was still preserved to the greatest extent within its corpse. If it was really mentioned, then the violent energy within the flesh and blood of this Region Lord realm multicolored python even far surpassed the corpse of that golden crow at the World Lord realm that had perished a long time ago.
This was also the reason why Yi Xian did not plan to eat too much. As far as he was concerned, eating 100 feet of golden python meat would be his limit. Any more and it would be useless. The violent energy in the python meat would damage the foundation of Yi Xian's fleshly body. Soon after, as Yi Xian spoke, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise turned to look at each other.
Then, the latter leaped up and pounced onto the golden head of the python that was roasted to the point of dripping with oil.
The immemorial hairy tortoise's body had shrunk to the size of about 10 feet. It was eating the head of the python that had shrunk to about 70 feet. It didn't plan to swallow such a good thing in one gulp. At this moment, it was lying on its stomach with a happy and intoxicated expression on its face. It planned to slowly savor and enjoy it. As the pieces of boa meat entered his mouth, they melted as soon as they entered his mouth, turning into a pure and warm energy that spread throughout his body. The immemorial hairy turtle's green fur instantly lit up. This was the rhythm of the precious body giving off a bright light. Countless native fierce beasts thousands of miles away looked at it with shining eyes, but none of them dared to come over. The primordial porcupine beside it was already drooling.
At this moment, its mouth was even more saliva, and it was almost flowing into a river.
However, no matter how much it shrunk, it could only reach its current size of about 1,000 feet. Its bloodline was different, so it couldn't compare to the immemorial hairy tortoise. This python head was only 70 feet long. If the primordial porcupine ate it now, it would probably swallow it in one gulp. Because of this, he negotiated with the immemorial hairy tortoise. The primordial porcupine would eat the python head while the primordial porcupine would wait for the 70,000 feet long giant python bloodline true body. After roasting it, they would eat heartily. In fact, Yi Xian didn't make him wait for long. While the immemorial hairy tortoise was lying on the 70 feet long python head and savoring the delicious food, Yi Xian had already started roasting the 70,000 feet long colorful python bloodline true body. The Shenong unusual flame could be more or less, big or small. After all, when the Shenong cauldron transformed into its true form, it was a terrifying cauldron comparable to a giant star. The central region volcano, which took up a third of the space inside the giant cauldron, contained the Shenong unusual flame. From this, one could imagine how majestic the Shenong unusual flame was. Previously, when he was roasting the python head that was only 100 feet long, Yi Xian only drew out a small wisp of the dual-colored flame from the Shenong cauldron. However, now that he was roasting the 70,000 feet long colorful python bloodline true body, he naturally couldn't do the same as before. With a wave of his hand, Yi Xian drew out a two-colored flame that was nearly 3,000 meters in diameter. It carried an extremely strong spirituality, and like a two-colored dragon, it stretched across the air and directly wrapped around the python's true body, roasting it at full speed. This scene was too big. Not only was the entire army of indigenous ferocious beasts thousands of miles away in the void shocked, even the nearby primordial porcupine trembled slightly. When it came back to its senses, it had already narrowed its eyes and quietly sized up Yi Xian from head to toe. After showing such a skill, there was probably no one in the core hinterland of the root of all evil who would look down on Yi Xian's little primordial demonic ape who was only 100 feet tall. At least, the dual-colored flame was already extraordinary. Being able to refine a wisp of it in one's body was already an extraordinary fortune. However, Yi Xian had summoned a fire dragon with a diameter of 1,000 feet with a wave of his hand, and it didn't seem to be his limit. That alone was enough to make people ponder. At that moment, he probably hadn't noticed that the 20 or so Star-Lord level indigenous ferocious beasts leading the charge in the void thousands of miles away were looking at him as if he were a Star-Lord expert of the same level. As for the universe realm indigenous ferocious beasts behind the 20 or so Star-Lords, there was even more fear in their eyes because the dual-colored fire dragon made them feel a strong sense of crisis. Even the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise were looking at him with a lot of solemnity. In just a few minutes, the colorful python bloodline true body was finally completely roasted. All the impurities were removed, and it shrank to a size of 50,000 feet. Such a volume was still extremely terrifying. As it floated in the air, it continuously emitted a strange fragrance that assailed the nostrils. There was even golden oil flowing around it. Even Xian couldn't hold it in anymore. Oh woo! The primordial porcupine was the first one who couldn't hold it in anymore. It howled in joy and directly jumped over. Its entire body was hanging on the 50,000-foot-long golden python bloodline true body. It squinted its eyes as it ate. Intoxicated. Chapter 37:14. A woo! Roar! As soon as Xian's words fell, the 10 million native beasts in the void immediately flared up. In truth, they didn't expect to get a share of the pie at all. After all, no matter how large the rainbow python's bloodline true form was, it was only a few thousand meters long. If they really wanted to divide it, none of the native beasts would get a single bite. Not to mention, the cultivation bases of many of them were indeed rather low. While this golden feast made from the plump flesh and blood of a recently fallen region lord was indeed delicious, it might not be the best food for them to replenish their energy. However, these native beasts were quite knowledgeable. They had long seen the extraordinariness of the Shenong flames that Xian had summoned with a wave of his hand. Although there were some native beasts among them who were proficient in fire arts and could roast their own meat, the effects of the Shenong flames weren't inferior. How could they compare to Xian's Shenong flames? It could be said that after roasting the Shenong flames, even ordinary flesh would have the medicinal effect of a great flesh medicine. It was definitely a continuous improvement in quality. However, Xian was only one person after all. Moreover, he was only 30 meters tall and seemed to still be in his infancy. How could so many native beasts be shameless enough to pester him to use the Shenong flames to roast their meat? Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be so shameless as to ask. However, it was different now. This newcomer was very likable. He actually waved his hand and promised that as long as they could find ingredients, they would roast as much as they could. He wouldn't refuse any of them. To these native beasts, there was no better news than this. Therefore, they cheered and jumped for joy. It was as if they were celebrating a festival. All of them roared in excitement to the extreme. After a few howls, almost all of the native beasts charged out. Some turned around and charged into the void behind them, while others charged directly into the core region behind Xian. The two battles with the Second Universe's army had taken place in these two regions. There were still many remnants of the invaders in these two regions that hadn't been cleaned up yet. These were all ingredients, after all. Of course, there were also a large number of corpses of the origin of all evil, but they obviously wouldn't be dragged over for Xian to roast. Although they were both space beasts, they couldn't overcome this hurdle in their hearts. Although the native beasts of the root of all evil were of different races, they all treated this region as their home and were very united. They definitely wouldn't eat the remains of their own faction. For example, the remnants of the primordial life forms in the depths of the core region that they had all poured their emotions into. Otherwise, they would have been eaten clean over the years. How could they still be left floating in the void until now? Although there were less than 10 million remnants of the powerhouses of the Second Universe left in these two battlefields, there wasn't much difference. Even if all the native beasts couldn't share a bloodline true body, it was still possible for 2 or 3 of them to share a bloodline true body. As the army of nearly 10 million native beasts dispersed, the void in front of them, which was originally crowded with native beasts, instantly emptied out. There were more than 100 native beasts at the level of Old Monster Jianghu and Old Monster Starlord, who were rushing toward the 50,000-foot-long golden python meat, along with the primordial porcupine and Old Monster Jianghu. The primordial porcupine and Old Turtle shared a 50,000-foot-long colorful python bloodline true body. Xian didn't stop. While the 100 or so native beasts at the level of Universe Realm and above were eating together, he was also eating heartily. After a while, he wouldn't have the leisure time. All the remnants of the powerhouses of the Second Universe on the two battlefields would be dragged over. They would probably be piled up into several small mountains. Even if Xian were to roast them one by one, it would probably take a while. While he still had the leisure time, he had to first swallow the 100-foot-long colorful python meat that he had estimated before. Perhaps he could use the powerful chi and blood essence energy contained in the 100-foot-long colorful python meat to break through 1 or 2 minor realms in one fell swoop before the piles of corpses were dragged over. Now, his original body was already at Void Realm level 7. If he broke through 2 more minor realms, he would reach Void Realm level 9. When he had time later,
He would take a tube of level 13 liquid that he had already prepared, and he would be able to advance to the 13th great realm, the primordial realm.
As for the state of the three-headed, six-armed devil ape's true body, Xian was currently at the 7th level of the cosmic light realm. If his original body broke through 2 small levels, then the cultivation he displayed in the devil ape's true body would most likely rise from the 7th level of the cosmic light realm to the 9th level of the cosmic light realm. He was only one minor realm away from the 15th great realm, the universe realm. As long as his original body consumed the level 13 liquid and successfully advanced to the 13th great realm, the primordial realm, then Xian was confident that the cultivation strength he displayed in the devil ape true body state would officially step into the universe realm. At that time, he would finally be able to display the battle strength of the 15th great realm, the universe realm. It would definitely be a completely different scene. At this time, a large piece of roasted golden flesh from the head of a domain lord fell into Xian's mouth. After being vigorously chewed a few times, it instantly turned into a boiling hot stream that flowed down his throat. This pure flesh and blood essence energy was too majestic, and the level of this energy was too high. Even though Xian was currently in his three-headed, six-armed devil ape true body state, he actually felt that every inch of his flesh and blood, every single cell, inside and outside of his body was instantly filled with pain as if they were being torn apart. Although it was said to be painful, there was clearly a kind of incomparable numbness and itchiness. Moreover, he also felt that his entire body was warm, as if his entire body had become much lighter, as if he was about to ascend to immortality. At this moment the 1.08 billion pores on his body were simultaneously spewing out 9 colored auspicious clouds. Vaguely, one could even hear the strange clanking sounds of mysterious chains being shaken. This was the sign that the potential shackles of Xian's physical body were being pulled, and were about to be torn apart. This feeling was both painful and joyful. It was not the first time that Xian had experienced this, and he felt a kind of pain and pleasure that he was familiar with. Although there was a strange phenomenon happening in his body, the movements of his hands did not stop because of this. The 5,000-meter-long piece of golden python meat in front of him was constantly being reduced. At the same time, there were too many foodies eating at the same time. Xian originally thought that his original plan was only to eat about 10 feet of python meat, so there was no need to fight for it. But now it seemed that if he were to imitate the primordial turtle and slowly eat, he would only be able to eat about 40 to 50 feet of python meat in the end. The difference was too big. Xian immediately increased his speed and wolfed down the meat. After an unknown amount of time, Xian's original body, which was the primordial devil ape true body, finally heard the familiar sound of the system's notification in his mind. It made him feel refreshed and excited. Chapter 37:15. The essence contained in the colorful python's meat was too rich. It came from the bloodline true body of a colorful python that had just been cut down. It had also been roasted by the dual-colored flames of the Shenong cauldron, which removed all the impurities, leaving only the essence behind. Xian had only eaten about 8 to 9 meters of python meat when the sound of chains came out from his body. His potential shackles were torn apart several times, and his body was once again refined. His chi and blood realm was raised, and he advanced by 2 small realms. Today, his physical body and chi realm had increased from the previous void rank 7 to the current void rank 9 great perfection. Xian had refined the level 13 liquid in advance and was ready to take it when he had the time. If he succeeded, Xian's chi and blood level would reach the beginning and end domains, which were the 13th major realms. He would be one step closer to the 15th major realm, which was the universe realm. In fact, at the same time that his original body's chi and blood realm improved, the cultivation strength of the three-headed, six-armed demonic ape real body that he was displaying now also improved, and it just so happened that it was also 2 small realms. In other words, Xian was at the peak of the 9th rank, which was the 14th major realm, when he was in the true form of the three-headed, six-armed demonic ape. He was only one minor realm away from the universe realm. Once Xian took the level 13 liquid and broke through to the Genesis realm, which was the 13th major realm, he would be able to reach the 15th major realm when he was in the true form of the three-headed, six-armed demonic ape. He would become a universe realm expert. Xian was excited when he thought of that. He had finally reached the universe realm. Even though he could only achieve it when he was in the true form of the three-headed, six-armed demonic ape, he would soon be able to feel the power of that realm. While Xian's cultivation had improved, the primordial porcupine, the primordial tortoise, and over 100 star lords and universe realm native beasts were still eating heartily. All of them had extremely intoxicated expressions on their faces. Obviously, they really enjoyed such delicious food. No, it wasn't just delicious.
All the universe realm experts and Star Lords were emanating auspicious light from their bodies after they'd eaten a large amount of Region Lord realm golden python meat.
Even the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle were the same.
Even though they were Region Lords as well, the medicinal effects of the multicolored python meat that was roasted by the dual-colored flames of the farmer god cauldron were truly too formidable. It was simply like being refined into a medicinal pill, and even Region Lords like them who were at the same realm of cultivation as them had obtained a great deal of benefits from it.
Xian didn't dare to continue eating. His physical body had just been tempered, and his chi blood had advanced by 2 minor realms in one go.
He had broken through some of the shackles of his potential, and it was time for him to slowly nourish himself.
He should take some precious medicines with gentler effects, such as the Netherworld Furnace Lotion. He shouldn't take such a violent medicine, or it wouldn't be beneficial to his physical body at all. That was why he hadn't taken a tube of level 13 liquid right away to break through to the 13th realm, the Genesis realm. In fact, more than half of the 50,000-meter-long golden python meat had been eaten. After all, there were 2 Region Lords eating it, and they didn't have any scruples. There wouldn't be any hidden dangers no matter how they ate it. In addition, there were over 100 Star Lords and Universe Realm native beasts eating heartily. The remaining golden python meat probably wouldn't last for long and would be gone soon. It was also at this moment that the native beasts below the Universe Realm, who had left in a hubbub, returned one after another. Some of them came alone, some in groups of 3 or 5, dragging the bloodline true bodies of the experts of the Second Universe, which were relatively large. Those guys knew that Xian couldn't roast the meat for them one by one. It would take too long, and he would probably die of exhaustion. Therefore, after all the native beasts dragged the meat they found into the void, they didn't say anything and directly threw it into the void. Then, they obediently retreated into the distance, drooling as they waited quietly. A hill of meat ingredients was slowly formed, followed by a second one. After a while, 5 hills of meat ingredients were piled up in the void. It was quite a spectacular sight. At this moment, almost all the native beasts that had left had returned. Xian didn't hesitate any longer. He waved his hand and summoned an enormous dual-colored flame from the space inside the Shenong cauldron. He started roasting the first hill of meat ingredients. A rich aroma instantly spread out. Under the roasting of the enormous Shenong dual-colored flames, a mountain of meat ingredients quickly turned golden and dripped with oil. This time, the entire core area was filled with a rich aroma. Although the freshly roasted meat wasn't as good as the golden python meat of the Genesis realm, it was the best nourishment for the native beasts who were relatively weak. After all, the Shenong cauldron flames were extraordinary. Even regular meat ingredients could be roasted with them. Some of the native beasts quickly pounced on the food and ate heartily. Xian, however, didn't stop there. He waved his hand, and the enormous Shenong cauldron flame swept out again, covering the second hill of meat ingredients. Just like that, the 5 mountains of meat ingredients were all roasted in less than the time it took to eat a meal. When Xian waved his hand and stored the Shenong dual-colored flames into the Shenong cauldron within his body, the last group of native beasts that had been waiting anxiously all howled as they charged towards the last mountain of golden flesh. This scene was too shocking. As far as the eye could see, there were 5 golden mountains of flesh in the void. The first one was full of native ferocious beasts, and all the ferocious beasts in this corner of the void were eating wantonly. Their bodies were emitting eye-catching multicolored lights, and the intense fragrance in the void was so thick that it almost didn't disperse. It was as if one would be intoxicated with just a deep breath. Not long after, 5 enormous hills of bones were left in the void. Not a single piece of meat could be found on each skeleton. It was as if a dog had licked it clean. Some of the native beasts began to break through on the spot. This time, all of them had benefited, and they looked at Xian with gratitude. At the same time, some of them were burning with passion, because some of the gluttonous fellows hadn't had enough and were already looking forward to the next feast. The primordial porcupine, primordial turtle, and the Star Lord old monsters also stopped. The 50,000 zhang long golden python meat had been reduced to white bones. They completely approved of Xian and pulled him into the depths of the core area. However, Xian stopped halfway with a frown. The pressure from the bodies of the primordial creatures in the void was too strong, and it made him stop. Chapter 37:16. The protection of the netherworld furnace? Yi Xian's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the critical moment had arrived. It was no wonder these native beasts were able to move unhindered through the core of the origin of all evil, practically ignoring the terrifying pressure from the remains of powerful primordial creatures in the void. After all this time, it turned out that they had obtained the protection of that enormous netherworld furnace in the depths of the core. Without a doubt, that mysterious netherworld furnace was definitely a primordial treasure that was no weaker than the farmer god cauldron. It was just that they each had different functions. The farmer god cauldron was primarily used for refining medicine. Of course, it was also used to store items and nurture various medicinal herbs and flesh materials. The cauldron contained a vast space. Around the central region volcano were a series of mountains, where rare medicinal herbs that were hard to find in the outside world were planted. There were also some spiritual birds and spiritual beasts that possessed extraordinary medicinal effects inhabiting the cauldron. However, they had all yet to mature, still in their growth phase. Compared to the farmer god cauldron, the netherworld furnace's effects were more violent. If the farmer god cauldron's effects were more constructive, then the netherworld furnace's effects were more destructive. Inside was an enormous and mysterious millstone of profound power. All the remains of primordial creatures could be thrown into the millstone, where they would be ground into meat paste. The impurities would be removed and the essences would be refined in the end. Of course, the current netherworld furnace might have been adjusted to a higher level of refinement. This was because the refined product was the all-evil origin elixir that was effective for the recovery of primordial experts and even primordial supremes. As a result, it had very high requirements for the raw materials. However, the level of refinement could clearly be adjusted. For example, if the standard of refinement was lowered, the grade of the raw materials that the mysterious millstone could accept would decrease. Similarly, the final product refined would also decrease in grade. It would no longer be the all-evil origin elixir. Instead, it would be a product with a slightly weaker effect. However, no matter how weak it was still a good thing. After all, the grade of the netherworld furnace was still there. Even if the standard of refinement was lowered, the flesh materials thrown into the millstone would not be too bad. In Yi Xian's view, the so-called protection of the netherworld furnace might have something to do with this. There was absolutely no need for it to protect these native beasts in the core of the origin of all evil for no reason at all. They would not be affected by the terrifying pressure from the remains of primordial creatures in the surrounding void. According to Yi Xian's guess, if nothing unexpected happened, the native beasts that lived in this core area were actually all flesh and blood materials raised by the netherworld furnace. One day in the future, they might be used and thrown into the netherworld furnace to be ground into meat paste to refine some kind of netherworld furnace product. It was the same for the remains of the primordial era creatures around the netherworld cauldron, which it had spat out as unqualified raw materials. In the future, they would all be used together. They would be thrown into the netherworld furnace together with all the native ferocious beasts that lived in this core hinterland. They would be ground into meat paste by that huge mysterious millstone and condensed into some kind of product. When he thought of this, Yi Xian immediately felt a chill in his heart. The methods of the Eye of the Heavens were truly extraordinary. It was just too vicious. While it was using the flesh of supreme primordial creatures to refine the all-evil origin elixir, this one had already begun raising the flesh materials needed to refine another product of the netherworld furnace in the future. It was a pity that the primordial porcupines and primordial tortoises, native beasts that had been raised like pigs and sheep, had completely failed to realize this. It was truly lamentable. Little Featherhead, get me a drop of devil ape true blood. You're still under the protection of the netherworld furnace, so you can't cross over. I'll help you do this. Just as Yi Xian was muttering to himself, the immemorial tortoise, whose entire body was filled with forgiveness, climbed onto Yi Xian's head once again and asked for a drop of devil ape true blood. From the sound of it, it seemed that it was going to throw it into the netherworld furnace, similar to registering a household register. From then on, Yi Xian would be protected by the netherworld furnace. Yes. He was able to walk freely in this void without fear of the terrifying pressure emanating from the remains of the powerful primordial beings in the void. Yi Xian sneered inwardly. The netherworld furnace was clearly registering the future flesh materials. He immediately hesitated. He did have devil ape true blood. After all, he had already condensed the devil ape true body. He only needed to squeeze out a drop from the 3-inch devil ape that was suspended above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness, which represented the devil ape true body. That would be the so-called devil ape true blood.
But the problem was that the 3-inch devil ape wasn't just obtained from the 9-eyed golden crystal that represented the primordial devil ape bloodline. Yi Xian had also separated a strand of his primordial spirit and fused it with it. Now they had completely fused together, and there was no distinction between them. In other words, if Yi Xian squeezed out a drop of devil ape true blood from the 3-inch devil ape, then this drop of devil ape true blood would more or less contain a strand of Yi Xian's primordial spirit's aura. If that was the case, it was hard to say whether the netherworld furnace would be able to detect any clues. Moreover, this drop of devil ape true blood contained a strand of Yi Xian's primordial spirit's aura. This was something that Yi Xian wasn't too reassured. If the netherworld furnace wanted this drop of devil ape true blood, it wouldn't just be to register the future materials in advance and create a roster. It would also have other uses and purposes. In that case, wouldn't Yi Xian be restrained? The primordial spirit of the primordial spirit was no joke. Even if this drop of devil ape true blood was only an extremely weak strand, Yi Xian didn't dare to be careless with the grade of the netherworld furnace and the work of the primeval heaven's eye. Perhaps this strand of primordial spirit's aura would be enough to scheme against Yi Xian? Just as he was hesitating, Yi Xian's primordial spirit suddenly felt a burning sensation on the left side of the chest of the devil ape's body. That was where the corpse lantern tattoo of the headless infant's corpse was located. However, Yi Xian's primordial spirit was currently in the form of a devil ape. His outer appearance was that of a black ape covered in black fur, so the corpse lantern tattoo couldn't be seen at all. However, the sudden reaction of the headless infant's corpse at this time, could it be because of this drop of devil ape true blood? If the headless infant's corpse took action, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't have to worry about that drop of devil ape true blood. Even if there was a strand of Yi Xian's primordial spirit's aura, it wouldn't be a problem. Perhaps the headless infant's corpse would mix in something else. It was a terrifying existence on the same level as the heaven's eye. With it taking action, how could the netherworld furnace scheme against Yi Xian? Chapter 37:17. Although the left side of Yi Xian's chest was slightly hot, there was no other reaction immediately. However, he could clearly feel that a drop of devil ape blood had condensed in his body. Moreover, it was mixed with a mysterious aura that Yi Xian himself could barely detect. There was no doubt that this was the trick that the headless infant corpse had secretly arranged in this drop of devil ape blood. With it taking action, Yi Xian naturally had nothing to worry about. He immediately waved his hand and summoned this drop of so-called devil ape blood that the headless infant corpse had added something special to, suspending it in the void in front of him. The immemorial turtle immediately flew out and wrapped this drop of devil ape blood with a wisp of aura. Following behind it, it rapidly moved towards the deepest part of the core hinterland of the root of all evil. Yi Xian didn't know how it did it, but it shouldn't be too complicated. If nothing unexpected happened, this drop of devil ape blood should have been directly thrown into the netherworld furnace, and then directly accepted by it. From then on, this 3-headed, 6-armed devil ape blood would also be registered as one of the future flesh materials by the netherworld furnace. However, in the end, who was scheming who, Yi Xian already knew in his heart. Although he still didn't know and couldn't guess what the headless infant corpse's trick was, with the infant corpse's temperament, it would definitely make a big move once it made a move. This time, there was a good show to watch. The only regret was that this good show might have to wait for a while. Obviously, there was no hope for it at present. While muttering to himself, Yi Xian suddenly felt that from the deepest part of the core hinterland, a wisp of invisible majestic aura suddenly descended upon him, causing Yi Xian's body to stiffen and then completely dissipate. In the next moment, the strong sense of pressure that Yi Xian had been feeling from the surrounding void completely disappeared. He knew that from this moment on, even without the protection of the thin film created by the headless infant's corpse, he would be able to freely walk in this core hinterland like the other native vicious beasts. He could even approach the netherworld furnace. Of course, if he wanted to enter the interior of the netherworld cauldron, he would not be able to do so. This also meant that he had been acknowledged by the netherworld furnace and the origin of all evil star region. After all, the origin of all evil star region existed for the netherworld furnace. At the same time, it also meant that Yi Xian's true form as a 3-headed, 6-armed demon ape had completely integrated into the circle of native ferocious beasts in the core hinterland. He had been completely accepted as one of them. The root of all evil star region, the buffer zone of the central region. Now, a day had passed. The Second Universe Coalition Army, which had retreated from the core hinterland in front of them to the buffer zone of the central region, had already finished reorganizing. Now,
Order had been restored. Many of the 12 million troops had been lost in the demon domain. By the time they arrived at the source of all evil domain, only 10 million remained. In the battle before the army retreated from the core hinterland, nearly 2 million battleships, fortresses were destroyed. Therefore, there were less than 9 million soldiers left in the second universe. The loss of these battleships was actually nothing much. What really caused the morale of the entire fleet to plummet was the death of that old monster from the Colored Python clan. Because of Du Jiting's death, the entire army had been shrouded in dark clouds. The various fleets were not in a good mood, especially the Colored Python clan. The old monster from the Colored Python clan's fleet was so angry that he was about to go crazy. This time, when the Second Universe Coalition army invaded the First Universe, the Colored Python clan was simply unlucky. It was as if they had not checked the imperial calendar before leaving the house. Previously, when they were in the demon domain, the only old monster from the various fleets who had died was from the Colored Python clan. Now, in the origin of all evil star region, the only old monster who had died was from the Colored Python clan. This was simply F***ed by a dog. No, even if they were F***ed by a dog, they might not be able to feel so indignant. The only old monster in the entire army, the Blood Wyrm clan's elder Jiao Kong, immediately ordered the entire fleet to rest and reorganize indefinitely after chasing after the little demon ape that killed Du Jiting. No one, no ship, was allowed to enter the origin of all evil star region without permission. In the core hinterland of the star field, they would wait until reinforcements arrived. Immediately after, a scout fleet left. Their mission was to return to the second universe as soon as possible through wormholes. They would report everything that had happened here to the second universe so that the higher-ups of the various races could discuss and come up with a follow-up plan. At the same time, Jiao Kong also separated a fleet of 3 to 4 million from the nearly 9 million troops left in the central region's buffer zone. They followed the previously constructed stable passage through the outer region of the origin of all evil, and arrived at the entrance of the passage to guard it. This stable passage was constructed by the Second Universe Coalition Army. There was no reason for other forces to casually pass through. The mission of this guarding fleet was to prevent any other forces from entering, including the incoming Wan Luo Federation's Overwatch Council Senlon fleet. No matter who it was, if they wanted to enter they could. They could build a stable passage from another direction. Hardly had the army of almost 5 million warships been put in place when the first fleet that ran over eagerly to take a share of the pie arrived unstoppably. It was the Senlon fleet of the Overwatch Council that represented the Wan Luo Federation. Other than the Federation's Overwatch Council's Long Huai, who had personally led the army to question them, there was also a Star-Lord-level elder from the Wan Luo Federation Senate. The Senate was the concentration camp of the Wan Luo Federation's high-end combat power. As everyone knew, the Wan Luo Federation was actually a front alliance formed by the humans of the First Universe and the various races of the Federation of the Second Universe. Their only enemy was the Tianji clan. Although it was the only force in the 3 universes that could contend against the Tianji clan and could be considered a colossus, in reality, the Wan Luo Federation did not have its own territory. Even the headquarters of the Federation was built on a large piece of land rented by the Immortal Dynasty on the Immortal Planet. Of course, from another point of view, the Wan Luo Federation could be considered to have an infinite territory. The entire Third Universe and the entire Second Universe where the human race was located were both territories of the Federation. However, that was only in name. In reality, these 2 universes were still managed by the various races themselves. However, basically, every race would have an existence above the Star-Lord level who would enter the Federation's Senate. Generally, those who were sent to the Wan Luo Federation and entered the Federation's Senate were existences that were not very popular in their respective races. And they could obtain far more in the Senate than they could in their respective races. They could obtain cultivation resources. It could be said that the headquarters of the Wan Luo Federation had spent a lot of effort to rope in these Star Lords and even Domain Lords from various races. Chapter 37:18. The Star-Lord Federation elder who had arrived with Long Huai in the Blue Fleet of the Federation's Overwatch Council was named Du Shifeng. Coincidentally, he was not only from the Second Universe, but also from the Colorful Python clan. However, Du Shifeng wasn't a Star-Lord when he left the Colorful Python clan. He had joined the Council of Elders of the Federation with his master. His master wasn't well liked in the Colorful Python clan back then. He had competed with the current chief of the Colorful Python clan for the position of chief of the clan, but failed. He was later suppressed, and it just so happened that the Council of Elders of the Federation extended an olive branch to him,
So he left the colorful Python clan in anger.
He took Du Shifeng with him.
However, the master and disciple were treated with great respect when they arrived at the Council of Elders of the Federation. After 1,000 years, his master had broken through from the Star Lord state to the Region Lord state, and was already one of the Region Lords in the Council of Elders of the Federation. Even Du Shifeng, who had only been in the peak of the 9th level of the Cosmic State back then, had broken through to the Cosmo State and the Star Lord state after 1,000 years. He was no longer a burden to his master. Once he became a Star Lord, Du Shifeng had also become an official elder of the Federation, but he was still a Star Lord, which was one level lower than his master's level, which was that of a Region Lord. It was safe to say that everything Du Shifeng had was given to him by the Thousand Luo Federation and the Council of Elders of the Federation. He didn't have anything to do with the colorful Python clan, but it wasn't much different. Even to this day, Du Shifeng still remembered how the master and disciple had been suppressed and ostracized after his master failed in the competition for the position of chief. To put it bluntly, not only did he not feel a sense of belonging to the colorful Python clan, he even resented them. If not for this, the Senate of the Myriad Luo Federation would not have sent Du Shifeng to the Senlon fleet this time. Even more coincidentally, the Star Lord who was guarding the channel of 5 million warships in the second universe happened to be from the colored Python clan too. His name was Du Wei, and he was a direct descendant of the current leader of the colored Python clan. To put it bluntly, the colored Python clan was the enemy of Du Shifeng and his master. Of course, this kind of enmity referred to competition within the clan. However, as a matter of fact, as the current chief of the colored Python clan suppressed and ostracized Du Shifeng and his disciple after taking office, and as a result, they eventually left the clan and joined the Council of Elders of the Federation. The relationship that was originally just a competition within the clan had developed to a point where it was no different from real hostility. Because of this, when Senlin's fleet arrived, Long Huai and Du Shifeng, in the name of the Federation's headquarters, the Overwatch Council, and the Senate, ordered the guarding fleet blocking outside the stable passageway to make way. The two fleets almost erupted into conflict on the spot. The old Star Lord, Du Wei, who was guarding the fleet, was in a fit of anger. This time, the colored Python clan was at a disadvantage. They had lost Star Lords and Domain Lords one after another. For the entire clan, it was a heavy loss. Under such circumstances, he happened to run into an old rival who reprimanded him in the name of the Wan Luo Federation. How could he be kind? In the end, while the garrison fleet and the blue fleet that had come to ask for answers restrained each other and did not fight on the spot, the two Star Lords from the colored Pythons, who had a grudge against each other in the void beyond the domain of the root of all evil, began to fight each other.
This battle lasted for 2 days.
The two old Star Lords fought with all their might. From time to time, there would be small abandoned stars in the void that were destroyed by the aura of the battle and directly exploded. A large area of the void thousands of miles away had become a battlefield. The aura was chaotic, and the battle raged endlessly. Without waiting for the shocking battle between the two old Star Lords to end, the other two fleets of the human clan, which followed closely behind the Overwatch Council of the Federation, finally arrived one after another. The Immortal Legion, which represented the eternal dynasty of the human clan, and the fleet of space battleships, which represented the 10 ultimate heavenly palaces. Apart from Long Ziwen, the cosmic state Long Ziwen, the commander of the Immortal Legion was also a Star Lord of the Imperial Dynasty. The fleet of space battleships of the 10 ultimate heavenly palaces was led by Gong Xingtian, the vice palace master of the Diju Palace. He was an advanced Star Lord himself, who was extremely strong.
The 3 fleets arrived at the same time.
Zhao Kong, the old Blood Dragon clan leader who was in charge of the main army of the second universe in the buffer zone of the source of all evil, finally showed up. Boom! Amidst a world-shaking boom, an energy claw the size of a mountain rushed out from the outskirts of the root of all evil star field. With a single swipe, it knocked away the two old Star Lords, Du Shifeng and Du Wei, who had been fighting for 2 days and nights in the void ahead. Immediately after, a figure with his hands behind his back walked out from the outer region. He seemed to be walking slowly, but in just 2 or 3 steps, he had already traversed millions of miles of space and arrived before the 3 fleets that were lined up in front of him in a triangle formation. It was Zhao Kong, the old realm master. The 1000 Net Federation, the Eternal Dynasty, the 10 ultimate heavenly palaces. You're all here. If the heavenly fate race had brought a few more fleets of slave races, the top forces of the 3 universes would have gathered here today. Standing in the void, as the only old realm master present,
Zhao Kong's face was full of pride.
He glanced at the fleets of the three forces that were lined up in the void in front of him. Then his face darkened, and he snorted coldly. Humph, as I said before, this is a secret alliance formed by the races of the Second Universe to launch a punitive expedition.
I said that there was no need for the Federation and the human race to interfere. You sent a fleet with such fanfare. Do you think the races of the Second Universe can be bullied?
The higher-ups of the fleets of the three forces all remained silent.
Since the old monster didn't admit it, there was no point in blaming him. After all, the fleets that the three forces had sent first didn't have any old realm masters. Now that they were weak, they could only endure for now. Otherwise, if they offended this old realm master from the Blood Dragon clan, they would only be asking for trouble.
Humph, don't blame me for not warning you.
With just your 3 fleets, you'd better go back to where you came from. The source of all evil isn't a place you can touch. Now, the Colored Python clan has already lost a realm master. If you don't want to give up, think about it yourselves. If it weren't for the fact that we're all part of the Federation, I wouldn't have bothered to mention these words. After that, Zhao Kong flicked his sleeves and flew toward the periphery of the source of all evil. That's all I have to say. Think about where you want to go. Chapter 37:19. A region lord from the multicolored Python clan has perished? This news was simply like a huge bomb, and it stunned all the experts of the 3 fleets that were arranged in a triangle formation. After a short moment of silence, exclaims of shock instantly erupted and resounded through space. My God! What exactly has happened? A region lord from the multicolored Python clan has actually perished? This is simply sensational news. It's too difficult to accept. There is no doubt that in this star system, the source of all evil, there is some kind of shocking horror. No wonder the Second Universe's allied army left a fleet of 5 million ships to guard the passage they built. It is clear that they have stopped the momentum of advancing, Feng Luo said. That's right. It said that the root of all evil star zone is divided into 3 regions. The outer region, the central region buffer zone, and the central region. If I'm not mistaken, the Second Universe Alliance army must have encountered a setback after entering the central region. What exactly is there? It's actually capable of causing a region lord to perish. How many days has it been? He clearly perished in battle. Could it be that a world lord is obstructing the path ahead? It shouldn't be. Otherwise, that region lord from the Blood WYRM clan would have probably retreated a long time ago. It's impossible for him to still be there. They clearly intend to wait for reinforcements. The allied forces of the Second Universe should have retreated to the central area, but they still haven't given up. Since it's able to make practically all the races in an entire universe not hesitate to mobilize such forces to seize it, and even after a region lord perished, they still refuse to give up and guard the passageway to prevent us from entering. Looks like the fortune of this root of all evil is absolutely extremely shocking. Along with the exclamations of surprise from the experts of the fleets, the higher-ups of the 3 fleets fell into deep thought as well. They'd expected that the plans of the clans of the Second Universe were extremely great, but the news they just obtained upon arriving here still caught them off guard. Since even a region lord had perished, then there were at least region lords native to this region up ahead, and there would definitely be more than a single one. Otherwise, there were 2 region lords amongst the allied forces of the Second Universe, so it was impossible for a region lord to perish after a battle. It was even to the extent that it was very likely that terrifying existences at the World Lord realm existed within this region of space. However, such a possibility wasn't very high. Otherwise, Zhao Kong would have probably retreated a long time ago. Based on the current situation, the strength of our fleet is probably far from sufficient to seize the fortune within this region of space. Long Huai from the Federation's Overwatch Council had a worried expression on his face. It's still insufficient even if we join forces with the Eternal Dynasty's undying army. We need at least 2 region lords to be confident in our success. In that case, we can only report the situation back to the Federation and request the Council of Elders to dispatch region lords. On the side, Star Lord Elder Du Shifeng nodded with a hint of unwillingness on his face. To be able to make old ghost Zhao Kong like this, it's definitely extraordinary. If I'm not mistaken, the Alliance Army of the Second Universe should have just sent a small team of light armored scouts back to report and request for help. Reinforcements. There isn't a huge difference in time between us, and the only difference is our grasp of information. When he spoke up to this point, Du Shifeng paused for a moment and frowned before he continued. Don't waste any more time. Give the order right away to build a stable passageway and advance all the way to the central region's buffer zone. The army will set up camp there, and then dispatch a small group of scouts to enter the core area and scout as much as possible. After that, immediately report the situation to the Federation and request reinforcements. In next to no time, Long Huai gave the order, and the Senlon fleet chose a breakthrough point at another direction. Over 300,000 forts of various sizes activated the spatial compaction device and advanced all the way towards the outer area of the region of space. Almost 5 million battleships of various types followed closely behind them, and they moved incessantly towards the depths of the central region's buffer zone. Similar orders were issued successively to the Eternal Dynasty's Undying Army and the 10 Extremity Celestial Palace's Stellar Battleship Army. The three enormous fleets chose different directions, and they built stable passageways at the same time as they advanced forward. At the same time, some comparatively smaller fleets started to arrive at the region of space. Some were from races like the Een Demon race in the second universe that did not join the Myriad Net Federation and preferred to be alone. Some were fleets from the slave races in the first universe. There were also fleets privately sent by the three great human empires in the third universe, or secret forces of some large and small countries, as well as stellar battleship fleets sent by some small sects in the human cultivation camp. There were even some scattered rogue cultivators who came alone or in groups of 3 to 5. This time, the movements of the various races in the second universe's federation were too big. At the beginning, almost all the forces in the three dimensions took it seriously and thought that the spearhead was directed at the Tianji race. However, today, the Tianji race had migrated and was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, this army of 10 million gathered by the various races in the second universe had strangely arrived at the star region of the source of all evil. Their targeting and purpose were too obvious. Almost all the forces in the three dimensions were keenly aware of some problems. Like cats and kittens that had smelled blood, they all flocked to the star region. Obviously, these forces who came through the two large wormholes that connected the two dimensions of the second universe and the third universe at the front of the Demonkin star region must have paid a toll when they passed through the star region of the Demonkin star region. Except for some rogue cultivators who came alone because they were too small of a target and could avoid the toll by activating the concealment array, the fleets of the other forces, big or small, had to pay a price if they wanted to pass through the star region of the Demonkin star region. It could be said that as to what the fortune in the star region of the source of all evil was, except for the allied forces of the various races in the second universe who had arrived first, all the other forces, including the rogue cultivators who had come after hearing the news, knew nothing about it. However, the Demonkin race had already made a fortune before the truth of the fortune in the star region of the source of all evil was revealed. At this moment, when countless forces in the three dimensions of the universe were converging on the star region of the source of all evil in the central region of the first universe, the upper echelons of the Demonkin royal family and the Demonkin Emperor planet were all raising their glasses and celebrating. Now the Demonkin Emperor Mo Wentian and the upper echelons of the Demonkin race, who had truly tasted the benefits of being a ferryman, were completely convinced by this young Prince Xian. Chapter 37:20. When Grandpa Mo and the other two passed through the outer area of the source of all evil and entered the buffer zone of the central region, the star zone of the buffer zone was already bustling with people. Even before the countless low-level black beetles in the buffer zone of the central region were completely wiped out by the second universe's coalition army, this star zone had never been so lively. Although the central region buffer zone was called a buffer zone, it was actually an extremely vast star field. It was just that there were too many fleets stationed here. Although it did not appear too crowded, as far as the eye could see, this void was extremely lively, and there was no kind of one to be seen at all. Large areas of the Starry River were completely empty. The second universe's coalition army occupied a large part of the void. The blue fleet of the Myriad Net Federation, the immortal army of the human race's science and technology camp, and the starry battleship army of the 10 ultimate celestial palaces of the cultivation camp also occupied a large part of the void. These were the 4 camps, and each camp had more than 5 million battleships of all kinds. They were spread out in the void. In addition to these 4 camps, there were also a large number of small fleets and teams formed by rogue cultivators who had gathered and temporarily formed alliances with each other. In short, the entire buffer zone of the central region was like a starry night market, clamorous to the extreme. What's going on? It's a bit noisy. After passing through the outer area that was full of cracks in the void with great difficulty, Grandpa Mo was shocked by the bustling scene in front of him as soon as he arrived at the bustling central region's buffer zone. While looking around in bewilderment, he extended his mental power to search for some details and muttered to himself, "Is this still the source of all evil? Isn't this the most dangerous place in the first universe's planar universe? Look at how lively it is now. Why do I have the guts to come to the starry sky?
Is this the feeling of a market? It was no wonder that he had such an illusion.
The scene in front of him was too smoky.
Not only were there countless battleships in the void, but there were also a large number of starry sky powerhouses in the void outside the battleships, flowing endlessly. Basically, some small forces, small tribes, and a large number of powerhouses in the fleets of the rogue cultivators were taking this opportunity to communicate with each other.
On one hand, they were gathering information from each other. On the other hand, they were taking advantage of this opportunity to exchange information and cultivation resources. From a certain point of view, the buffer zone of the root of all evil was indeed more like a temporary starry sky market. How could it still look like a plain-level starry sky danger zone?
Of course, no matter what those factions and itinerant cultivators did, they could only stay in the relatively safe buffer zone of the central domain, where the countless low-level black beetles had been wiped out. As for the demarcation line in the void that connected to the core hinterland of the root of all evil, not to mention the other small forces in the rogue cultivator alliance, even the 4 major camps led by the allied forces of the various races of the second universe didn't dare to cross the demarcation line.
Of course, the myriad Net Federation's Blue Fleet, the Immortal Army of the Immortal Dynasty, and the Starry Sky Battleship Army of the 10 Extremity Celestial Palace had all sent out small teams of scouts in the past 2 days and quietly entered the core hinterland ahead.
Although they had lost more than half of their scouts, at least the general situation of the core hinterland was known to the 3 top forces that followed closely behind the allied forces of the various races of the second universe. Although they still didn't know that in the depths of the core hinterland ahead, there was a large void refining array that could steadily produce the root of all evil. But at least they knew that in the core hinterland ahead, there were a large number of ancient starry sky ferocious beasts that were rarely seen in the outside world. They were suspected to be guarding something, and this should be the ultimate goal of the allied forces of the various races of the second universe.
Regarding this information, the 3 top forces had already sent out small teams of scouts to quietly return to the Demonkin Star Zone. They would report to the headquarters of the various forces in the third universe and ask for reinforcements. However, it would take at least a month for the reinforcements to arrive. Even if they tried their best to jump through wormholes, it would still take a long time for them to go and return. Yi Xian was well aware of this. In fact, he was extremely well aware of the current situation in the Central Region's buffer zone. During these past 2 days, he'd practically wandered through the entire core hinterland. Besides not entering the Netherworld furnace again, he'd practically explored every nook and cranny of the core hinterland. During this entire process, Yi Xian had seized the opportunity when no one was paying attention to put away the remains of many primordial beings that lay across space within the Farmer God Cauldron. There was no lack of the terrifying remains of some world lords amongst them. It could be said that up until now, merely Yi Xian's gains in this aspect could absolutely be considered shocking.
The remains of these primordial beings at the Region Lord Realm, and even the World Lord Realm would be the best raw materials for him to refine his medicine with the Farmer God Cauldron in the future. However, to Yi Xian, he had only obtained a few of the remains of the ancient creatures that lay in the void of the core.
For him, the benefits were far from enough. Yi Xian could be considered to have expended a great deal of effort to come to the root of all evil. Not only had he racked his brains to obtain a devil-ape true body with 3 heads and 6 arms, he hadn't even hesitated to sell his labor and become a barbecue worker for the sake of getting along well with the native beasts in the core hinterland. Moreover, it was obvious that this wouldn't be the only time. So long as a battle broke out between the native beasts in the core hinterland and the fleets of the various powers in the central region, and the former obtained a huge amount of ingredients after the battle, then Yi Xian would be able to obtain a huge amount of ingredients. He would definitely continue to barbecue.
Since he'd put in so much effort, then his plans were naturally not small. Now that he'd obtained the acknowledgement of all the native beasts in the core hinterland, the netherworld furnace, and the entire root of all evil, he would be able to enter the core hinterland at will and approach the netherworld furnace without the protection of the headless infant's corpse.
This was merely a benefit that came along the way.
Besides that, Yi Xian had an official plan and the benefits within it that were waiting to be realized and obtained. Not to mention anything else, just seizing this opportunity to make a huge fortune like he was a ferryman in the midst of a gold mining frenzy was absolutely impossible.
On one hand, he had a premonition that the secret of his true identity would probably be exposed in the near future. So before that happened, he had to do his best to obtain a huge amount of warships and resources in order to prepare to return victorious. Chapter 37:21. During these 2 days,
Yi Xian had gained a comprehensive understanding of the situation of the native beasts in the core area of the root of all evil. That day, he'd entered the core area for the first time in his true form as the three-headed six-armed devil ape, and he'd seen an army of 10 million native beasts. Even though it wasn't the entire army, it was almost there. At that time, the army of the Second Universe's various races had invaded the depths of the core hinterland. Under the summons of the two old monsters, the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise, the entire core hinterland, with the exception of a few native dire beasts that were in the midst of breaking through, the rest that could be drawn out had already left their nests. In short, even though there were more than 10 million native beasts in the core area of the root of all evil, there were less than 20 million native beasts, and there were around 15 to 16 million native beasts. Over 100 Star-Lord Realm old monsters. Over 1,000 Universe Realm experts. The rest were all indigenous ferocious beasts with cultivation bases below the Universe Realm. As for those above the Star-Lord Realm, besides the rare Region Lord Realm old monsters like the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise, there were two more Region Lord Realm old monsters in the core area. However, they were at the peak of the 9th level of the Region Lord Realm, and they were charging into the Sector Lord Realm now. They hadn't shown themselves for many years. As for true Sector Lord Realm native beasts, there weren't any in the core area of the root of all evil. There had been one in the past, and it was a nether blood black dragon whose seniority far surpassed the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was the only overlord of the core area of the root of all evil. Because that nether blood black dragon had been at the peak of the 9th level of the Sector Lord Realm for tens of thousands of years. At that time, the primordial porcupine and primordial tortoise had just broken through to the Region Lord Realm. Not long after that, the nether blood black dragon had successfully broken through to the Universe Realm after close to 1,000 years of closed-door cultivation. After that, he'd entered the nether furnace for the sake of exploring its secrets. Because the higher-ups of the native beasts in the core area of the root of all evil had tried many times. Even Sector Lord Realm experts could only approach the entrance of the nether furnace, and they weren't able to go deep. In order to truly enter the nether furnace, one had to break through to the Universe Realm. What they didn't expect was that the dark blood black dragon, who carried the hope of all the indigenous fierce beasts in the core hinterland, entered the interior of the dark furnace. However, after that, they completely lost contact with it and never came out again. Originally, the primordial porcupine, primordial tortoise, and all the other native ferocious beasts in the core of the root of all evil were extremely curious about this enormous nether furnace that was as large as a planet. They could clearly feel a sense of familiarity from the netherworld furnace, but they didn't know what it was used for, let alone the actual situation inside. The only thing that could be seen was that the remains of primordial beings at the Region Lord Realm, and even the World Lord Realm would occasionally be sprayed out from within the nether furnace. Ever since the infernal blood black dragon disappeared into the netherworld cauldron, the primordial porcupine, the primordial turtle, and the other two primordial beasts were the only ones left in this core of the root of all evil. Their only wish was to break through to the Universe Realm as soon as possible. That way, they would be able to enter the nether furnace just like the infernal blood black dragon and explore its ultimate realm. Unfortunately, this was obviously still very far away. The primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle were only at the 7th level of the Region Lord Realm. Even though the other two native ferocious beast kings were already at the 9th level of the Region Lord Realm and had both entered seclusion to break through, they were still only at the 1st level of the Region Lord Realm. But even if they succeeded in breaking through, they would only be at the 1st level of the Sector Lord Realm. They were still an entire realm away from the minimum requirement to enter the netherworld furnace. After understanding the situation clearly, Yi Xian was so angry that he almost cursed on the spot. Of course, he was cursing that infernal blood black dragon that had sent itself to its death. He had entered the nether furnace before, so he knew the situation inside. Now, he could vaguely guess the standards and requirements of the raw materials used to refine the all-evil liquid in the nether furnace. The Universe Realm was obviously the bottom line. This wasn't difficult to guess because even the remains of primordial beings at the Sector Lord Realm had been treated as trash by the nether furnace and spat out. That pitiful infernal blood black dragon had finally reached such a height on the path of life evolution and become a terrifying Universe Realm powerhouse. However, in the end it had ended up in such a state. It had crawled into the nether furnace and was ground into a 9-colored pulp by that enormous millstone and the remains of primordial beings. What was even more infuriating was that the other native ferocious beast kings, including the primordial porcupine, the primordial turtle, and the other two domain Lord Realm ferocious beast kings, had actually been thinking about following in the footsteps of that infernal blood black dragon.
This was simply unbearably stupid. Unfortunately, he couldn't say anything about this, so this made Yi Xian feel extremely stifled and resentful. Fortunately, these 4 native ferocious beast kings were still a long way from reaching the universe realm. Even though Yi Xian was indignant, at least he didn't have to worry about them foolishly sending themselves to their deaths like that infernal blood-black dragon for the time being. The outside world has been extraordinarily lively these past 2 days. After casting aside these thoughts, Yi Xian turned to look at the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle. I secretly went out to take a look. In addition to the fleet formed by the allied forces of the various races of the second universe, the native races of the first universe have also arrived, as well as the human race of the third universe, in the past 2 days. While Yi Xian had been understanding the situation in the core of the source of all evil from the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise, who were already brothers with him, had also understood the situation outside the source of all evil from Yi Xian. They had almost never left the root of all evil star domain, nor had they come into contact with beings from the outside world. There was also no such thing as the Starry Sky Network, so they were completely unaware of all this. It was even to the extent that they didn't know that there were actually 3 known large-scale stable universes in the current world, and the root of all evil star domain was merely a small piece of the central region of the first universe. Of course, that was only in the past. Now, after Yi Xian's explanation, they'd gained a rough understanding of the outside world, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle, and even those 100-plus old fellows at the Star-Lord realm within the core hinterland of the first universe. According to my knowledge, besides the humans from the third universe that aren't tasty and have smelly meat, there are also the hellhole ants and some other special races out there. Because they don't have any meat at all, they're unable to eat. The others are all top-rate ingredients. For example, one of the 3 great native races of the first universe, the spatial rats. TSK. 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 Their meat is really tender. After they're cleaned and roasted, it's absolutely a supreme delicacy. As he spoke, even Yi Xian started to drool while the eyes of the primordial porcupine and primordial turtle lit up. They hadn't even heard this little brat praise the corpse of the Region Lord realm multicolored python like this. Could it be that these spatial rats are really that delicious? Chapter 37:22. Roar. Squeak. For ingredients? Hearing this, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise immediately became excited. They raised their heads and roared excitedly. The hundreds of Star-Lords and Universe Masters nearby were also extremely excited. They roared as if they had been injected with chicken blood. However, Brother Porcupine and Brother Turtle, you shouldn't go. Your levels are too high. You only need to stay in the rear. You'll be able to intimidate them. Otherwise, if you go for a walk, they'll probably all run away. That would be terrible. Although this was basically the truth, Yi Xian more or less had the intention of flattering him. The primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise felt extremely comfortable when they heard this. They only felt that this little ape was truly too sensible, mature, thoughtful, and even had amazing barbecue skills. This time, they had really picked up a treasure. The primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise deeply agreed with Yi Xian's suggestion. However, even if they were only going out to scout for information and not directly start a war, the little ape's cultivation was indeed too weak. They couldn't be reassured if he didn't go out with a team of guards. You should establish a team of guards. Don't have too many of them. 20 will do. That's right. Remember to follow the little ape closely. Don't let anything happen to him. Otherwise, I'll roast all of you if no one gives me barbecue. While talking, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle glanced at the group of Star-Lords and Universe Masters not far away. In the end, their eyes fell on the 100 Star-Lords. Although the Universe Masters were not weak, they still felt that it was not safe. After all, there was a Zone Lord Blood Serpent guarding the buffer zone of the Central Zone. It was a coward, but a Zone Lord was a Zone Lord after all. The primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise weren't confident of winning without the protection of 20 local Star-Lord beasts. A moment later, an escort squad of 20 Star-Lord ferocious beasts was established. They were all enormous and intimidating. The auras they released from their bodies were even more shocking. Very quickly, Yi Xian leaped onto the back of a Jing-shrouded earth dragon that was around 300 meters in size. With a wave of his hand, the Jing-shrouded earth dragon raised its head and let out a long howl. Its figure immediately dashed towards the dividing line that led to the buffer zone in the central region. 19 ferocious beasts of different sizes followed closely behind it. They were all Star Lords. It was an appalling lineup. The central zone's buffer zone, the root of all evil. Grandpa Mo and the other 2 Star Lords of the royal family had already changed their appearances. Although they were still human beings, their unique mental power had been concealed. Grandpa Mo looked like a crude, unaffiliated human cultivator at this moment. The 2 Star Lords next to him were the same. They were 3 unaffiliated Star Lords from the human race, who had invited each other to compete for treasures in the root of all evil. At this moment, old Mr. Mo and his companions were sitting cross-legged in midair. There was a small table between them, on which there was wine and fruits. They seemed to be in a leisurely mood. There weren't many of them, only 3 Star State experts, but they were all Star Lords after all. One of them was at the peak of the 9th rank, which meant that he was a half-step zone lord. In the central region buffer zone, only the old monster from the Blood Wyrm clan in the allied forces of the Second Universe was stronger than him. Of course, there were also a few half-step zone lords who were on par with old Mr. Mo in the fleets of the other races and major forces. Even though they were few in number and were simply inconspicuous, the corner of space they occupied seemed to be rather spacious because there was a quasi-region lord amongst them. The experts of the other powers frequently shot their gazes over, and they were filled with fear. All of them were privately guessing the origins and background of these 3 Star Lords. However, nobody dared to disturb them. It was also at this moment that an earth-shattering roar was suddenly heard from the direction of the central zone's boundary, which the major forces had been paying close attention to. Then, an astonishingly luxurious patrol team appeared. A thorn armor earth dragon, which was 100 meters long, rushed out of the central zone's boundary majestically and appeared in the sights of countless experts from the major forces in the central zone's buffer zone. That thorn armor earth dragon was clearly at the peak of the 9th rank, which meant that it was a half-step zone lord. Even if the countless fleets of the various powers of the 3 universes were gathered here, there were less than 10 existences at such a level. So, as soon as it appeared, it naturally drew the attention of everyone. Even more shocking was that there were actually 19 other native ferocious beasts of various sizes following behind this quasi-region Lord Realm Earthworm, and all of them were at the Star-Lord realm. Such a luxurious group was simply terrifying, and the experts on the countless warships were practically instantly stunned. After that, numerous exclamations of shock that carried indescribable meaning resounded from the fleets of the Second Universe's allied forces.
Look!
That thorn armor earth dragon's back.
My God!
It's actually that little devil ape that killed the region lord of the multicolored python clan. It's actually still alive? Didn't ancestor Jiao Kong pursue it immediately? He was actually unable to kill it? There's something off about the situation. Not only is that little devil ape alive and well, it's even patrolling in such a high-profile manner, and it faintly shows the intention of displaying its might. Are the native ferocious beasts at the core of the territory about to take action?
All of this isn't the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is the background of that little devil ape.
An entire 20 Star Lords are patrolling with it, and they clearly intend to protect it. Moreover, that existence that's being trampled upon by it like a mount is actually a thorn armor earth dragon at the quasi-region Lord realm. That's heaven-defying. Exactly. The information revealed is too shocking. It's merely at the peak of the 9th rank of the cosmic realm, yet even a quasi-region lord has been reduced to being its mount. How terrifying is that little devil ape's identity? Is it the crown prince of the native ferocious beast clans? If it's really like that, then what's the backing behind that little devil ape? What realm of cultivation is it at?
My God!
A realm. Realm Lord realm existence? That's simply inconceivable. Along with these exclamations of shock, Jiao Kong, who resided within the flagship of the Blood Wyrm clan's fleet, opened his mouth wide with astonishment. At this moment, even he was slightly terrified. After a short moment of being stunned, he actually gasped and muttered to himself. Even a quasi-region lord has been reduced to being his mount? How could he have 20 Star Lords as guards in one patrol? It's too terrifying. This little monkey really has a frightening background. At the same time, Grand Elder Mo and the other 2 Star Lords were completely dumbstruck. They suddenly recalled what Yi Xian had told them. I'm the one with 3 heads and 6 arms. Chapter 37-23.
What?
This is the one who launched a sneak attack and killed the old monster of the colored python clan? He's only at the cosmic light realm. What a joke. So what if he's only at the 14th great realm? So what if he launched a sneak attack? If you have the ability, ask a 15th great realm universe mighty figure to launch a sneak attack on a great realm domain lord. I'm afraid he'll be tortured to death on the spot. That's right. It's a fact that the old monster of the colored python clan was killed. This ancient ape demon has successfully defied the heavens. Monster. This is definitely a peerless monster. He's still in his infancy, but he has already killed a supreme domain lord. He's too bold. With the bloodline of the ancient ape demon with 3 heads and 6 arms, once he grows up, he's destined to lead the world. Is he the 7th peerless monster today? He was actually born from the native ferocious beasts of the source of all evil. However, he deserves his reputation. After all, even young Master Linghu and young Master Netherworld have never killed a supreme domain lord. Something that even universe mighty figures don't dare to think about was done by a junior ferocious beast. Along with the exclamations from the allied forces of the various races in the second universe, the powerhouses of the various forces in the surrounding void knew that the old monster of the colored python clan, the old monster, had died at the hands of the young ancient demon ape, who had appeared in such a high profile. Some people even exclaimed at his battle achievements and determined that the young ancient ape demon that Xian was impersonating was the 7th peerless monster today. When the exclamations reached Xian's ears, he immediately rolled his eyes. He realized that the term, peerless monster, seemed to have stuck to him. He couldn't get rid of it no matter how hard he tried. He had just changed his identity, and now he was the 7th peerless monster today. There was no need to explain his valiant life. He wasn't the only one who felt this way. Even the 3 star lords of the demon race had the same feeling in their hearts at this moment. After the initial shock and disbelief, the 3 of them had basically accepted this fact now. Especially when they heard the words the 7th peerless monster in the world, they were even more certain. Because others didn't know, but they knew very well that the previous 6 peerless monsters were all that brat alone. It didn't make sense that the 7th peerless monster who had just appeared was someone else. This time, this old man is thoroughly convinced. With a bitter face, Grandpa Mo shook his head and sighed. In a voice that only he could hear, he muttered, "It's one thing to have the true body of a demon ape with 3 heads and 6 arms. But there's also the prince of an indigenous ferocious beast. He has 20 star lords guarding him whenever he goes out. Such extravagance. Alas, I can't help but admire him." Nearby, the other 2 star lords looked at each other with weird expressions and also sighed. At this time, with the arrival of Xian, countless starry sky masters from various forces in the Central Territory's buffer zone all focused their attention on this luxurious patrol team with a strong sense of vigilance. After all, those were 20 star lords. Hey, do you see that? That's the fleet, warships, and fortresses of the Void Rats. There's an enormous black rat engraved on them. It's easy to recognize. Xian raised his finger and pointed to a corner of the void in front of him. He didn't lower his voice at all. The words that came out of his mouth were clearly heard by all the experts from the various powers in the surrounding void. Trust me. The meat of such rats is definitely more delicious than that of pythons. The latter is still a bit rough, but the meat of the void rats is different. It's delicate and sweet. However, it's disgusting if there's a bit of filth left when it's washed and peeled. After all, they're rats. Pew! Before he could finish, a lot of noises were heard from the fleet of the Void Rats. After only 1 or 2 sentences, the 3-headed 6-armed ancient ape demons had become the target of the entire clan. He wasn't small, but his words couldn't have been more vicious. He was too infuriating. No matter what, the Void Rat clan was still one of the top 3 clans of the First Universe's slave clans, and they were equally as famous as the Demon Clan and the Hell Ant Clan. But now, they were being criticized in front of almost all the great factions in the 3 dimensions. Not only were they said to be delicate and sweet, but they were also said to be dirty. It was more than a slap in the face. It was basically a slap to the face and a stomp on it. Before the noises from the fleet of the Void Rats could stop, the 3-headed 6-armed ancient ape demons raised his hand and pointed in another direction. His words were as infuriating as ever. As for the hellish ants over there, they're the ones with the enormous black ants on their warships. They're the hellish ants. The hell ant is not a good thing at all. Its black shell is extremely hard, and its insides are filled with disgusting grayish-white meat. If it's fried, it might be crunchy, and can barely be used as a snack. It's definitely impossible to roast them. They're too meatless.
It's simply infuriating. As expected, a lot of noises were heard from the warships of the Hellish Ant's fleet. The Star-Lord Hellish Black Ant almost couldn't hold himself back. He was about to charge out and fight the annoying ape.
Unfortunately, he held himself back in the end.
The enemy's lineup was too magnificent. There were 20 Star-Lords, and one of them was a peak 9th rank Star-Lord.
He would probably be crushed and killed on the spot if he were to charge out.
Then, before the noises from the fleet of the Hellish Ants were over, the monstrous ancient ape demons pointed in the direction of the coalition army of the Second Universe.
Hey, that's the fleet of the Second Universe's allied forces. Old friends, we've roasted a lot of them before, but there are some races you haven't tasted yet. Think of a way to get some later. Make a big pot of stew and stew them all together. While speaking, the primordial little demon ape began to introduce. The Second Universe's races have a top 10 ranking. Because these top 10 races have extraordinary bloodlines, the value of their flesh and blood is higher than that of other races. The blood dragons, the cyan rocks, and the battle lions are the best. Of course, the barbarian bull's meat is also good. It's chewy and chewy. The Golden Eagle clan and the Colorful Python clan were fine, but the Silver Eagle clan and the Greedy Wolf clan could not be eaten. The experts of these clans could only be thrown away as garbage if they were killed. The former was a birdman, disgusting to eat, and the latter was suspected to be a weasel close relatives. The meat is either smelly or sour.
Chapter 37-24. A woo! Before Yi Xian could finish his words, an angry howl suddenly came from the flagship fortress of the Greedy Wolf clan's fleet. In between, there was a faint aura of a universe master. Obviously, this was a universe master in the 15th realm of the Greedy Wolf clan who was enraged.
This was indeed the case.
Although there were many clans that were criticized by Yi Xian at this time, none of the top 10 clans in the Second Universe were spared, including the Dark Turtle clan that had not come this time. However, compared to other clans, the Greedy Wolf clan had a violent temperament. In addition, Yi Xian said that he was suspected to be a close relative of a weasel and that his meat was either smelly or sour. This was not the first time that the Greedy Wolf clan's powerhouses had heard such words. Back then, young Master Linghu had humiliated the Greedy Wolf clan like this and killed the clan's young master, Lang Gang Lai. This kind of shame and humiliation had appeared again this time. With the violent temperament of the Greedy Wolf clan, it was obvious that they could not hold it in. Although the Star-Lord Old Monster in the clan's fleet did not say anything, the Greedy Wolf clan's Taoist son, Lang Gang Lai, who was accompanying the fleet, could not hold it in and roared angrily.
Little monkey, you are relying on a group of Star-Lord Old Monsters to support you. What kind of ability are you to talk nonsense? Is the bloodline of the ancient ape demon so despicable? I, Lang Gang Lai, am also a young descendant of the Greedy Wolf clan. Do you dare to fight? I will definitely suppress you.
A woo! As the voice sounded, a figure rushed out of the flagship fortress of the Greedy Wolf clan's fleet and floated in the void in front of the fortress.
He immediately activated the bloodline in his body and showed his bloodline true body.
This was a greedy wolf with a height of 1,000 feet and a body full of blood-colored hair.
There was not a single strand of mixed hair. Ferocious flames filled the sky. He raised his head and roared toward the sky. Lang Gang Lai? The Taoist son of the Greedy Wolf clan? He is indeed extraordinary. Although he is a young descendant, his cultivation realm is not weaker than some of the clan's elders. He has stepped into the 15th realm.
In the three Great Plains, I reckon that only the Taoists of the various clans can possess the cultivation level of the Universe Almighty in the younger generation. They are all hidden and nurtured with all their strength.
They won't come out easily. I didn't expect that the Greedy Wolf clan would actually send out their Taoists this time.
For such a young almighty being of the universe, I'm afraid that even in terms of talent, he's not weaker than Prince Xian, young Master Linghu, and the rest of the 7 peerless geniuses.
You can't say that.
The Taoists of the various clans have been nurtured through years of accumulation. Although their cultivation realms are stronger than Prince Xian, young Master Linghu, and the rest of the 7 peerless monsters, the latter earned the title of monster with his own strength. In my opinion, if we're talking about talent, the Taoists of the various clans can't compare to him. There's no point in arguing about this because everything will be revealed very soon.
Isn't there a Tao child and an unparalleled monster here? It seems that a great war is about to break out.
After this war, whether the Taoists of the various clans who have been nurtured for many years are superior, or the 7 peerless demons are superior, We will soon know. Hearing these discussions, the eyes of Jiao Kong, the old monster in the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm fleet, flashed. He seemed to be moved as he muttered to himself, "This is an opportunity." It seems that this little demon ape must be the child of some ancient ape demon at the sector lord level in the core hinterland. Otherwise, why would he have 20 star lords guarding him? Even the two old monsters, the primordial porcupine and the primordial tortoise, are afraid of him? Besides, he's only at the cosmic state, yet he can run rampant in this star zone, the source of all evil. It's very likely that there's only one sector lord in the core hinterland ahead. Otherwise, his child wouldn't be so rampant. It seems that if we can capture this little demon ape and make the ancient ape demon at the sector lord level hesitate, we'll be able to take the initiative. After all, it's extremely difficult for such a being to have a descendant. Seeing that he sent 20 star lords to guard his child, it's obvious that he values him very much. Jiao Kong became excited as he spoke. He secretly sent a voice transmission to Lang Gongqiang, who had already rushed out of the flagship fortress of the voracious wolf clan and was provoking him. "Lang Gongqiang, I'm Jiao Kong. This kid's identity is very sensitive. The older generation like us can't do anything. Otherwise, it would be even harder to capture him. I'll leave this mission to you. Continue to provoke him with words and ask for a battle between peers. Capture him at all costs. As long as he's restrained, I'll take action as soon as possible." Lang Gongqiang's eyes glittered. He vaguely guessed what Jiao Kong meant. If they could capture the little demon ape, the Alliance army of the Second Universe would be able to enter the core hinterland again and obtain the treasures there. Lang Gongqiang would definitely be the first to take the credit then. Lang Gongqiang was both angry and greedy at the thought of that. He was afraid that the little demon ape wouldn't accept the challenge, so he shouted even louder, "Roar! Little monkey, are you scared? If you are, go back to your mother and drink milk. You shouldn't have come to this space battlefield." Roar! This was no longer a clamor. It was clearly a humiliation. The 20 star lord level ferocious beasts protecting Yi Xian were instantly enraged, and a few of them were about to charge out. "Wait! He claims to be a junior. How can we bully him?" Before those star lords could rush out, Yi Xian sneered and dashed forward. "You're just a cosmic state weasel. I can kill you easily." Roar! When he finished speaking, Yi Xian had already reached the battlefield in the void. Although he was much smaller than Lang Gongqiang's greedy wolf bloodline true body, he was only 30 meters tall. However, he was fearless. Among the 3 greedy wolf bloodline true bodies, the greedy wolf bloodline true body faced the enemy and punched out. "You'll know who's going to kill who soon." "Roar!" Lang Gongqiang sneered. Without moving, he raised his head again and let out a long howl. There was no anger in his howl, nor was there any emotion. Instead, it seemed to be even longer. There was a strange rhythm within the howl, causing people's hearts to tremble. It was an indescribable feeling. Soon, a strange scene appeared. Following Lang Gongqiang's long howl, a bright silver moon slowly appeared in the sky of the buffer zone of the source of all evil, shocking the entire audience. It was obvious that this strange moon was related to Gang Chong. It was summoned by the mysterious wolf howl that he was currently emitting, or rather, it was condensed. Yi Xian's eyes glittered. The greedy wolf howls at the moon? It wasn't the first time he had seen such a scene. Yi Xian had experienced it from Lang Ganglai, the young patriarch of the greedy wolf clan, during the battle in the Shenong Cauldron. Obviously, the so-called Dao child of the greedy wolf clan was much more important than the young patriarch of the clan. Chapter 3725. But in fact, in any race, there is a hidden bloodline inheritance system, which is the Daoist bloodline. They are the true foundation of the bloodline inheritance of the entire race. Because of this, it was understandable that Lang Gongqiang's cultivation base was higher than the young patriarch Lang Gonglie's. Although both of them were well-known figures among the younger generation of the greedy wolf tribe, Lang Gongqiang obviously had more cultivation resources than the young patriarch Lang Ganglai. It can be said that for any race, the young patriarch can be abolished and replaced, but the Daoist absolutely cannot be lost. It is too difficult to cultivate them. At this time, Lang Gongqiang has indeed shown talent and strength that far exceeds Lang Ganglai. The same greedy wolf howls at the moon is displayed by him, and its power is clearly stronger than Lang Gonglie's. The greedy wolf's howl to the moon is an ancient divine ability passed down in the bloodline of the greedy wolf clan, but not every member of the greedy wolf clan can awaken it.
Sometimes, it is normal that no one can awaken it in several generations. The bright moon in the sky is actually not a real moon, but a projection of the bloodline ability. It has a mysterious power. It is said that where the light of this bright moon shines, all the energy will be taken by the user of this bloodline ability, and it can be swallowed and controlled at will. In such a case, the members of the greedy wolf clan who boasted such bloodline techniques were almost invincible. They were like a real greedy wolf who could replenish their consumption endlessly in the battle and greedily loot all the energy illuminated by the moon, including those of their opponents. Previously, when Yi Xian was fighting with the younger generation of the second universe in the internal space of the Shenong Cauldron, he was quite moved by Lang Gonglia's greedy wolf howls at the moon. This kind of bloodline ability that can continuously devour energy in a large area for its own use in battle is indeed a bit heaven-defying. As long as the bloodline ability exists, it can continuously replenish energy, and it is simply in an invincible position, becoming an unkillable cockroach. In order to test the power of this bloodline ability, Yi Xian did not hesitate to wave his hand and throw out 2 spiritual lightning techniques. Of course, he was using one of his 3 true forms, the body of black fog, so it wouldn't arouse any suspicion. It was obvious at a glance that this body of black fog was proficient in energy attacks, not blood and chi power. Kacha! Kacha! 2 bolts of invisible lightning struck out toward the head of the greedy wolf in the void ahead. However, at the same time as these 2 lightning bolts crackled, the strange and hazy moon in the sky suddenly flashed. Immediately after, the moonlight poured down, and the outline of 2 thick lightning bolts vaguely appeared in the sky. As soon as the 2 lightning bolts appeared, they completely collapsed, turning into a faintly visible energy that quickly shot toward the bright moon in the sky. Sure enough, it was devoured again. Wherever the moon of the greedy wolf shone, all energy could be devoured. Lang Gongqiang's mastery of this divine ability was far greater than Lang Gonglia's. Even though he had not reached the level where he could instantly devour all energy with the moon of the greedy wolf. However, in this moonlight zone, the more active the energy was, the more likely it was that the bright moon would sense and exert divine power on it. Then, it would decompose and devour the energy. The speed of these 2 lightning bolts was too fast and extremely active, so they were instantly captured, decomposed, and devoured. Yi Xian was not surprised by this scene, but most of the starry sky masters in the warships around the void all had their mouths wide open. Their faces were blank, and it was obvious that they were extremely shocked. The greedy wolf howls at the moon was indeed extraordinary. Even this kind of invisible lightning was defeated and its energy was devoured. Moreover, the bright moon manifested by this divine ability clearly had some kind of connection with Lang Gongqiang himself. It allowed him to replenish his energy at any time during battle through the bright moon of righteousness. This was a lost ground. Your lightning divine ability is useless against this Taoist. In the area illuminated by the moon of the greedy wolf, the more active the energy is, the more likely it is to be instantly sensed and captured, then decomposed and devoured. The more you use, the greater the benefits this Taoist will receive. Ha! Seeing that one of the 3 real bodies of Yi Xian, the black fog body, was decomposed and devoured as soon as it released 2 invisible lightning bolts, Lang Gongqiang laughed complacently and suddenly waved his hand. Now, let's test the power of your lightning divine ability. Crack! Crack! To everyone's surprise, 2 strange cracking sounds suddenly came from the strange bright moon in the sky at this moment. Then, 2 moon-white lightning bolts struck down at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they were above the head of Yi Xian's devil ape real body. In the void all around, exclamations sounded again at this moment. What? There's actually such a change? Not only did it decompose the opponent's attack, but it can also restore it and counterattack after devouring it directly? The moon of the greedy wolf is simply too amazing, okay? Lang Gongqiang's talent can't be so abnormal, okay? Yes, it's really too abnormal. To be able to comprehend the bloodline divine ability of the greedy wolf clan to such an extent and trigger the transformation of restoring and counterattacking, this is too amazing. Even in the greedy wolf clan, there are very few people who can awaken this bloodline divine ability. In the younger generation, it seems that only the former young master of the clan, Lang Ganglai, has this talent. I didn't expect that Lang Gongqiang not only awakened the moon of the greedy wolf but also comprehended a new transformation. As expected of the Taoist of the clan. This time, the prince of the indigenous fierce beasts, this lawless little devil ape, is probably going to be defeated. Although the ancient devil ape's bloodline is heaven-defying and has 3 real bodies, in the face of such a powerful ability,
all energy attacks are useless, and even have a reverse effect. His cultivation realm is lower than Lang Gongqiang's, so he can't fight at close range at all.
It's like his hands and feet are tied, and all means are ineffective.
The only result is that he can only be suppressed. Bang! A woo! As soon as the last discussion fell, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the void battleground in front of them, followed by an extremely mournful howl, full of unwillingness and pain. The primordial little devil ape, who was expected by the powerhouses to not dare to fight at close range, directly teleported to the side of Lang Ganglai without any scruples, dodging the two moon-white lightning bolts at the same time. Then, he flipped his hand and summoned a giant cudgel, which was 1,000 feet long, and held it in the right hand of the primordial little devil ape, which was covered with black hair, and smashed the cudgel on the head of the giant wolf.
Chapter 37:26.
A woo! A long, mournful howl resounded.
Lang Gongqiang's huge eyes rolled up as he passed out on the spot.
On the top of its head, a suspicious bulge the size of a small hill quickly appeared. Obviously, it was directly knocked out by the giant stick in the hand of the small Archean demon ape. It could be seen that the strength of the stick was so great that it made people shudder. This cudgel was actually another component of the Shenong cauldron, the Shenong pestle. This pestle had already been refined by Yi Xian, so it could change its shape at will. It could be big or small. Right now, when it was taken out by Yi Xian, it had deliberately changed its shape. It could not be seen at all. It had turned into a big weapon with a thin head and a thick head like a spiked cudgel. The small primordial ape demon was only about 100 feet tall, but it was holding a huge cudgel that was over 1,000 feet long. With just one strike, it knocked out the Taoist from the greedy wolf clan. Even the almighty expert's head was not able to withstand the blow, and a huge bruise appeared on his head. It was simply too ferocious. What a bullshasterisk Taoist. His head is too weak. Such a big bump appeared on his head after a light hit. He passed out immediately. I haven't even hit him enough yet. Just as the countless experts in the void opened their mouths in shock, the small archaic demon ape with 3 heads and 6 arms muttered in a human voice. It held the cudgel in its right hand and one of Lang Gongqiang's hooves in its left hand. It turned around and dragged Lang Gongqiang toward the 20 Star Lords behind it. This scene made countless people dizzy. The dignified Taoist of the greedy wolf clan, a mighty figure of heaven and earth in the 15th realm, looked like a prey that had just been hunted. He was dragged away in the void without realizing it. What made people even more speechless was that the guy who did this was still muttering to himself softly, complaining that his head was not hard enough and that he would pass out after a light hit.
It was not satisfying at all.
Pooh! Pooh! Far away, in the warships of the greedy wolf clan's fleet, the sound of vomiting blood could be heard clearly. Even the Star Lords who were commanding the fleet were infuriated by the abrupt scene. Seeing that the Taoist of his race was about to be dragged away, the Star Lord of the voracious wolf race could no longer care about anything else. After spurting out a mouthful of blood, he immediately rushed out of the flagship fortress.
Roar! Little devil ape, let go of my clan's Taoist, or else we won't rest until we're dead. Roaring.
The Star Lord of the greedy wolves simply activated his bloodline and revealed his true form, which was a silver-hair greedy wolf that was thousands of meters long. The terrifying pressure of a Star Lord spread out and turned into a wolf head that was thousands of meters long. It then bit Gongqiang, who was dragging the wolf, and was retreating. The little devil ape swooped down. Screech! Old wolf monster, don't you dare move. How shameless! You were the one who said that it was a battle between the younger generation, and now that you've lost, you're the one who's bullying the younger generation. Is the greedy wolf clan also shameless?
Do you really think we're pushovers?
If you want to fight, we'll annihilate all the members of the greedy wolf clan today. In the void up ahead, the 20 Star Lord ferocious beasts all moved. They rushed out and arrived in front of Yi Xian in the blink of an eye, protecting him behind them. However, they didn't stop and rushed in the direction of the greedy wolf clan's fleet. They were ferocious all the way, and it seemed like they were going to take this opportunity to get rid of the entire greedy wolf tribe fleet.
Boom! The Jing Armor Earth Dragon took the lead.
He was a peerless old man who had reached the peak of the 9th rank. He was extremely fast. He had revealed his true form, which was almost 10,000 meters long. He then shattered the wolf head that the Star Lord of the greedy wolf clan had launched. Pew! The Star Lord of the greedy wolf clan suffered a backlash as soon as the technique was shattered. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood.
Fellow cultivators, don't be agitated.
This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Before the Star Lord of the Greedy Wolf race could react, Jiao Kong, who was in charge of the Second Universe's fleet, spoke. An invisible force wrapped around the Star Lord of the Greedy Wolf race and pulled him out of the battlefield, shooting back toward the Greedy Wolf race fleet. Jiao Kong was about to explode at that moment. He had never expected that the Dao disciple of the Greedy Wolf clan would be so useless. He had been knocked out by the little monkey in the blink of an eye.
Not only had he passed out, he had also been dragged away in public. It was truly humiliating. However, the Star Lord of the Greedy Wolf clan was so impulsive that he even wanted to chase after the monkey, claiming that he would fight to the death. That old B***star gave the monkey an excuse to attack, and it was very likely that he would infuriate the ancient demonic ape at the center of the battlefield. That old monster was a terrifying being at the Sector Lord level after all. He wouldn't attack easily. However, the Star Lord of the Greedy Wolf clan had taken the initiative to claim that he would fight to the death. That was simply courting death. Jiao Kong was so angry that he could only try to mediate the situation, which was equivalent to forcing him to show weakness.
After all, he was the commander-in-chief of the army of the Second Universe and the strongest person in that army. Now, in order to ease the atmosphere, he had no choice but to say such words of weakness.
This had a great impact on the morale of the entire fleet. Fortunately, the monkey had restrained himself in the end. Even though the 20 Star Lord realm native beasts were strong, there was still a gap between them and Jiao Kong, who was at the Region Lord realm. At this moment, when they noticed that the little monkey was unharmed and a Region Lord had shown weakness, they could be considered to have barely obtained an explanation, so they didn't continue pursuing relentlessly. All of the 20 Star Lord realm ferocious beasts stopped in midair after Jiao Kong spoke.
After a few more cries of indignation, he turned around and retreated to a spot thousands of kilometers away from the other side of the void.
Right when Jiao Kong thought that this matter had temporarily come to an end, Xianxia, who had retreated to a spot millions of kilometers away, turned around at this moment. The club in his hand vanished, and with a flip of his hand, he withdrew a ferocious black demonic blade. He didn't say anything and slashed at Lang Gongqiang, who was being dragged behind him. Ow! A shrill howl resounded once more. This strike had sliced off Lang Gongqiang's left hind leg, and it woke him up from the pain. He howled before falling unconscious once more. That hit was really too vicious. Even now, his brain was still buzzing incessantly. Suddenly, the pain woke him up for a moment. It was just a conditioned reflex. You want to fight to the death? Come, let's hurt each other. Chapter 37:27. Roar! A woo! The Star Lord of the voracious wolf clan roared furiously, his voice shaking the surroundings, but this time, he didn't continue to taunt. He had already realized how unwise his actions had been. However, watching the path chosen of the Greedy Wolf clan being chopped off by the primordial demon ape and roasted in public made him furious, so he decided to vent his anger in such a way. Sizzle! The Shenong flames that Xianxia had summoned from the space inside the Shenong cauldron started roasting Lang Gongqiang's enormous hind leg as soon as it enveloped it. Sizzle! 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 It was the sound of the fat in the wolf's leg being roasted. Very quickly, a strong meaty aroma wafted out, gradually spreading far and wide in the surrounding void. Some of the experts in the void outside and not in the cabins of the battleship subconsciously sniffed the aroma, saliva flowing uncontrollably from their mouths. Xianxia was only joking when he said that the meat of the Greedy Wolf clan was either smelly or sour. As a matter of fact, the meat of the Greedy Wolf clan was delicious, and it was even more extraordinary after being roasted by the Shenong cauldron's dual-colored flames. It could definitely be called a meat medicine. After all, Lang Gongqiang was a Dao disciple of the Greedy Wolf clan. He had been nurtured since he was young, and the Greedy Wolf clan had used all of their resources to nurture him. It was unknown how many heavenly and earthly treasures had been thrown in, but his flesh and blood were even more precious than ordinary Greedy Wolf clan experts. At this moment, even Xianxia couldn't help it. He swallowed hard when he smelled the scent. It was only the hind limb of the true body of the Greedy Wolf. Naturally, it wouldn't have been enough for the 20 Star Lords to feast on it. At this moment, seeing that the wolf's leg was about to be roasted, the 20 Star Lords, including the thorned earth dragon, all shrunk their bodies to be much smaller than Xianxia's 30 meters tall body. They were clearly ready to share the roasted wolf's leg later. It was just a wolf leg, and they could only shrink their bodies to be able to taste a bit of it. Otherwise, any one of them could be swallowed into their stomachs in a single gulp. After a short while, the entire wolf leg was completely cooked. Yi Xian waved his hand and withdrew the Shenong dual-colored flame back into his body. A golden and shiny roasted wolf leg appeared in the void, still dripping with golden grease. An exotic aroma assailed everyone's nostrils, making them instantly drool. At this moment, the sound of saliva slurping echoed from the warships of the fleets far away in the void. Even the grand cultivators and the Star Lords couldn't hold themselves back after seeing the golden, greasy leg of the roasted wolf. On the side of the allied forces of various races in the second universe, the sounds of drooling coming from the fleets were especially loud and clear. This made the higher-ups of the allied forces feel very awkward. This was a hind limb that had just been cut off from a Dao disciple of an allied race. Now it was being roasted. All of them were drooling, and they really couldn't hold it in anymore. However, this awkwardness didn't last long, because as the Jing armor earthworm and the other 20 native ferocious beasts, along with Yi Xian, began to eat the golden wolf leg at the same time. Perhaps affected by their wolf-like enjoyment, even the greedy wolf clan began to drool. The sounds of drooling also began to come out from the warships of the fleet. If the members of their own race were like this, what was there to be embarrassed about? This was really too speechless. The original awkwardness spread, and the higher-ups of the fleets of various races in the second universe were all embarrassed. However, this embarrassment was all concentrated on the experts of the greedy wolf clan. Some of them couldn't hold it in and swallowed subconsciously. They didn't expect to make a sound. This was tantamount to slapping their own faces, making the Star Lords of the greedy wolf clan angry out of humiliation. They couldn't wait to split open a space crack in the void and crawl in. It was really too embarrassing. Sigh, one wolf leg is really not enough to eat. It's gone before I've had enough. It was also at this moment that a large roasted wolf leg had been eaten up by Yi Xian and the 20 gluttonous old monsters. Only a large leg bone was left in the air, and with a wave of his hand, he absorbed it into his body. Yi Xian reached out and wiped his mouth. He rolled his eyes and said in a tone and expression as if he hadn't had enough, "It's a pity that we can't cut off another hind limb of his. It wouldn't be good if we really killed him." It seems that there was a misunderstanding in the past. Although the greedy wolf clan is a close relative of the weasels, their flesh is still very delicious. The meat is thick but not rough, thin but not greasy. We've just caught a greedy wolf, so we have to raise it well. When its hind limb grows out, we'll cut it off and roast it. That's the way of the king. Puh! Hiss! As soon as Yi Xian finished his proud words, a muffled sound came from the flagship fortress of the greedy wolf clan's fleet again. The old monster of the greedy wolf clan was so angry that he coughed up blood again. In the fleets of the other clans, there was a lot of gasps. The words of the little primordial demon ape were too vicious. It was as ferocious as ever. It captured the Taoist of the greedy wolf clan alive, cut off one of his hind limbs, and roasted it in public. It was fine if it was eaten, but in the end, it didn't intend to let him go. Instead, it wanted to raise Lang Gongqiang like a carnivorous pig or dog. It wanted him to regrow the hind limb that was cut off. Then it would cut it off and roast it. That was the way of the greedy wolf clan. If the Taoist of the greedy wolf clan was reduced to such a state, although Lang Gongqiang was the only one to suffer, the entire greedy wolf clan would be humiliated and never be able to wash it off. Thinking of that, a lot of gnashing noises came from the warships of the greedy wolf clan's fleet. The entire clan had been humiliated by a little primordial demon ape that was only in the cosmic light realm. It made them so angry that they were all grinding their teeth. I seem to hear someone grinding their teeth, and it seems that there are more than one or two of them. Yi Xian waved his hand in the direction of the greedy wolf clan's fleet. An arrogant smile appeared on the faces of his 3 true forms, who were made of flesh and blood. He shouted, "Is there anyone who doesn't agree? If you don't agree, feel free to come over. I'll fight all of you alone. After all, you're just chickens and dogs." If even the Taoist is so weak, it's not hard to imagine the combat ability of the entire clan. You'd better come. My 20 brothers and I haven't eaten our fill yet. The more welcome it is. We'll just treat it as someone delivering food to us. We can eat our fill. Pooh. Chapter 37:28. Old thing, are you threatening us? If you have the guts, make another sound, and this turtle will immediately destroy your entire fleet.
Just as the greedy Wolf Clan's Star Lord finished speaking, two responses came from the core of the source of all evil in front of them. Then, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle rushed out from the boundary line. They still looked harmless. The former was only about 1,000 feet in size, while the latter was only about 100 feet in size. The former was a little turtle that was about 10 feet in size. Adding on the fact that the aura within their bodies was not obvious, it was simply impossible to detect them. With a cold glance, under the premise of not knowing anything, it was likely that no one would think of this pair as the old monsters of the domain masters. However, the words and tone of the pig and the tortoise instantly betrayed their identities. Although the elites from the various forces who were staying in the buffer zone of the central region had never seen them before, except for the allied forces of the various races of the second universe, they were still able to figure it out immediately. The commanders of the fleets were instantly vigilant, and the hairs on their backs stood up. The rogue cultivators in the void stood up one after another, not daring to show a calm and unruffled attitude of watching a good show. At this moment, the two old monsters in the core of the source of all evil had arrived. Not long ago, the allied forces of the second universe had invaded. If they had not taken action and severely injured Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, the situation today would have been completely different. It could be said that the two old monsters in front of them had directly and completely changed the direction of that battle, causing the allied forces of the second universe to suffer a crushing defeat. Even the old monster of the colored python clan, Du Jiting, if he had not been severely injured by the harmless primordial turtle, how could he have been so easily beheaded by the primordial little demon ape and died? Although Du Jiting was beheaded by the primordial little demon ape, in fact, the one who had truly caused his death was the primordial little demon ape. Now, these two old monsters of the domain had actually walked out of the core of the source of all evil in front of them and arrived at the buffer zone outside. No one could not be nervous. Once they showed their might, a bloody storm would immediately set off in this area. Who knew how many starry sky masters would die here with grievances? With the terrifying strength of this pig and turtle, even the Blood Wyrm clan's domain lord old monster Jiao Kong had to be wary of them. What they said just now was not exaggerated at all. A small fleet of the voracious wolf clan could be easily destroyed. Some rogue cultivators were vigilant, ready to turn around and escape from the buffer zone at any moment. The Star Lord of the greedy wolf race also realized this. When he was facing the 20 Star Lord ferocious beasts, he didn't dare to show his face anymore. At that time, he chased after Yi Xian and rushed out of the flagship fortress. After being dragged back by Jiao Kong, he felt a lingering fear when he thought about it. Now, in addition to the 20 Star Lords, 2 more area lords had come from the depths of the native beast's nest. At this moment, he was so scared that his whole body was trembling slightly, and the hair on his back was standing on end. He didn't even dare to breathe, let alone make a sound.
Why are you here? Didn't I tell you just now?
This ape can deal with this bunch of chickens and dogs outside by myself. Yi Xian, who had transformed into a 3-headed and 6-armed devil ape, walked forward slowly when he saw the primordial porcupine and turtle. He raised his hand and greeted them in an extremely casual manner. Obviously, their relationship was not ordinary. This scene made the experts in the surrounding void gasp once again. At this moment, practically no one had any doubts about Yi Xian's identity. He was merely at the 14th level of the cosmic realm, yet he was able to call 2 terrifying old monsters of the domain as brothers. His identity as the crown prince of the native ferocious beasts had been confirmed. At the same time, the guess that there was at least one ancient devil ape at the World Lord realm in the core area ahead had been confirmed. Otherwise, how could these 2 primordial porcupines and turtle act in such a manner towards a tiny little devil ape at the cosmic realm when they were at the advanced stage of the region Lord realm? A huge wave of sighs of emotion instantly resounded through the sky, and the gazes that shot at Yi Xian were filled with envy. Presently, it wasn't that the various powers of the universe didn't have any ancestors at the World Lord realm, but existences at such a level usually had very few descendants. Even if they did, they were born countless years ago when they were still comparatively weak. Now they'd long since passed the age where they had to rely on their parents, and they'd grown up themselves. After all, the higher the level of evolution, the lower the possibility of giving birth to a bloodline descendant. Because once a bloodline descendant was born at such a time, then because the mother's foundation was too solid and high, it would possess an extraordinary bloodline and formidable strength as soon as it was born. This didn't conform to the laws of the Grand Tao. As it was said, it was natural selection. The height of evolution of any living being was directly proportional to the chances of giving birth to a bloodline descendant. It was precisely because of this that practically all the ancestors at the World Lord realm of the various powers of the universe didn't have young children. Yet now, an example had appeared. This little devil ape that was merely at the 14th level of cultivation at the cosmic realm actually had a direct descendant of an ancient devil ape at the World Lord realm. His luck was simply off the charts. A World Lord realm devil ape had only gotten a child at an old age, so the degree to which he doted on his child was obvious just from the fact that he had an entire 20-star Lord realm experts by his side when he casually roamed the territory of his clan. With such a background and backing, this domineering and arrogant little devil ape was practically bound to command the world and grow into an overlord in the future. After all, the lifespan of an ancestor at the World Lord realm was too long, so could anyone do anything to him when he had the protection of such a terrifying existence? Of course, only the experts of other powers who didn't know the true background of the little devil ape would have such thoughts. As for Grand Elder Mo and the other 2-star Lord realm experts of the demon race, the only thing they could sigh in their hearts was Prince Shen's heaven-defying methods. Calculating the time, he had only set off a day or so earlier than Grandpa Mo and the others. Who could have expected that by the time Grandpa Mo and the others arrived, he would have already laid such a solid foundation among the indigenous ferocious beasts in the core hinterland? A random patrol had 20-star Lord realm experts escorting him, and 2 random domain Lord realm experts could casually call him brothers. This was simply 2F** King unbelievable. If it wasn't for Yi Xian's style just now that allowed Grand Elder Mo and the others to confirm his identity, they would have suspected that they had gotten the wrong person. Fellow Taoist pig, fellow Taoist turtle, what happened before was just a misunderstanding. Chapter 3729. It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Previously, the Tao disciple of the Second Universe's greedy wolf clan was strong, and he was just sparring with you. Little devil ape. Jiao Kong, who had no choice but to show up, had a bright smile on his face at this time. He said very politely, "It's normal for the younger generation to be angry because they were fighting. Who hasn't been young before?" But, speaking of this, Jiao Kong changed the topic, and his voice instantly became softer. He said tentatively, "But now that kid has been taught a lesson, and he even had one of his hind legs chopped off by the little demonic ape. It can be considered a big loss. The two of you also know that the Tao disciple of a race is not a small matter. Why don't you let him go?" "Fellow Taoist, I promise that I will teach him a lesson later." Jiao Kong almost patted his chest when he said the last sentence. It was as if he was telling the truth. F***ck off. Who are you trying to fool? Did you get kicked in the head by a mouse? As soon as Jiao Kong finished speaking, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle's faces slapped on the spot. They didn't treat him as an old monster of the same realm at all. It was as if they looked down on the old monsters of the Star-Lord realm or even the almighty figures of the universe. It couldn't be helped. It was really because this so-called elder of the Blood Dragon clan had not performed well in the previous battle. He had long left the impression of a coward in the hearts of the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle. The latter was so angry that he almost vomited blood on the spot, but he didn't dare to impulsively turn hostile on the spot. If that was really the case, the result of him facing 2 old monsters of the same realm was obviously destined, and that was that he would be miserably killed. This might be the reason why he left the impression of a coward in the hearts of the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle. As an expert, if one did not have the heart of an expert, one could only show off their might in front of the weak in the younger generation. But if they were to meet an expert of the same level who was slightly more unyielding, they were destined to be looked down upon. That little wolf cub was captured alive by little devil ape. We don't have the qualifications to let him go. If you have the ability, you can ask him for it yourself. That's right. Don't say that we didn't give you a chance. Weren't you the ones who clamored for the younger generation to fight? Sure. Then, the primordial turtle turned around and looked at the fleets in the void. He sneered and said, "The so-called 3 planes of the universe must be full of powerful forces and unaffiliated cultivators. We won't bully you. Don't you want the fortune deep inside the core hinterland? Don't you want that little wolf cub back? Sure, as long as it's a junior, we won't interfere. As long as you have the ability, just go and find the little hairy ape. We'll give you a place in the core area. The edge of the land. The younger generation geniuses of any power can enter the core area. The little hairy ape will also wait for them at the edge of the core area.
It will not enter the depths of the core area. The older generation like us will also retreat to the depths of the core area and not interfere in this battle. The little hairy ape himself said that he wanted to fight all of you by himself. What else can we not trust? Bring it on if you dare. The little hairy ape will challenge all the younger generation geniuses of the three planes on its own. However, let me make it clear first. The older generation like us won't enter the edge of the core area. None of you who aren't the younger generation are allowed to cross the line into the core area. That area will be left to the younger generation. If any of you disobey the rules, don't be afraid of us. We'll kill you mercilessly if you don't. Also, even the younger generation of your species will be responsible for their own lives if they enter the edge of the core area. You'd better think carefully before you enter. You might be able to enter alive, but you won't be able to cross the line. After that, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle turned around and waved at Xianxia, leading him and the 20-star Lord ferocious beasts to the boundary that would lead to the core area. The last words of the primordial porcupine only came from afar, and were heard by every starry sky powerhouse on the scene before its figure disappeared. Remember, the time limit is only 3 months. This is already very lenient. It is enough for the major forces to send scouts back to their clans and dispatch the younger generation heavenly legends. If the little hairy ape is still safe and sound, all the forces will retreat from the root of all evil. Otherwise, we'll kill every one of you that stays. Xianxia, who had been confused at first, was enlightened after hearing that. As it turned out, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle were trying to force all the fleets of the forces from the three planes to leave the central region's buffer zone. Most of the fleets that had stayed in the central region's buffer zone were the top forces from the three universes, such as the fleets of the races from the second universe, the first universe, the official fleet of the Federation of the third universe, and the 2 fleets of the human race and the cultivators. These top forces all cared about their reputation. Since they had made a bet with the native ferocious beasts of the root of all evil, then if they really lost this 3-month bet, they naturally wouldn't be so thick-skinned as to stay in the root of all evil starfield and not leave. Even if they still didn't give up, they would at least withdraw from the central region's buffer zone. They wouldn't even stay in the outer region of the root of all evil. Basically, they would completely withdraw from the root of all evil starfield and stay in the void of the universe outside the starfield to come up with other plans. Although they didn't leave in the end, they had withdrawn from the central region's buffer zone and the outer region after all. Even if there were any subsequent actions, with the distance between these 2 regions as a buffer, the native ferocious beasts in the core hinterland would have enough time after receiving the information from the scouts at the front. They would have time to respond. The central region's buffer zone and the outer region were very vast. If there were scouts stationed at the edge of the outer region, once they made a move, it would take at least 5 to 6 days to reach the core hinterland if a large fleet approached. Even if a small group of domain masters and star masters entered in a hurry, they would still have about 3 days left for the native ferocious beasts in the core hinterland. 3 days was enough for them to make some arrangements. After realizing this, Xianxia sighed faintly. The primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle had spent so much effort to make such arrangements because there wasn't a single sector master among the native ferocious beasts in the core hinterland.